Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, April 8th, 2019. I call the meeting to order and ask that you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Julie, roll call, please.
Okay. Chair Jericho.
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan.
Here.
Commissioner Colbert.
Present.
Commissioner Navarro-Woods. Here. Commissioner Zick.
Here. Okay, thank you. There are no announcements or presentations on the agenda for this evening's meeting, and that takes us to public comment. To ensure fair and equal treatment of all who appear before the Planning Commission and to expedite city business, speakers may be limited to 3 minutes during public comments to speak on any item within the Planning Commission's jurisdiction which is not listed on this evening's agenda. So if anyone wishes to speak tonight during public comment, please come forward. Yes.
Well, good evening, and Mr. McCarthy, how perfect that you're here. Because one thing I loved about Mr. McCarthy on the Planning Commission, he does not like things underparked, which is why I'm going to talk about a property one door down, 645 and 647 West 19th Street. Do you remember that, Mr. McCarthy? The residents shut it solid landings down because it was completely underparked, completely out of compliance, completely screwed up. And then magically, we got it shut down. And so then and I ended up getting sued, and the city ended up getting sued, and then everything got dropped because guess what? We were right. And then magically, Willa changed the parking requirement all on her own without anybody knowing anything about it. So Mr. Morehart, once again, with his triple net lease, I'm sure, magically gets to reopen. Did you know that, Mr. McCarthy? Magically got to reopen that. How did that happen? Now, we went for public request records and we found all this stuff, and it isn't properly, they took the curb cut out. I mean, it's completely illegal what they did. So, Mr. Curtis, we asked you for a written report on this property. I noticed it was open 2 weeks after it opened. The lease said it wasn't going to open till January. Could somebody on the Planning Commission please explain how this is happening, how the residents, no one gets to know anything about it, things just get changed to favor sober living operators. I was just in Santa Ana talking to an attorney last week and the other day, and I was just there today, and it seems somehow that things just got changed to favor sober living operators over the residents of Costa Mesa, and I think it's illegal.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Steve Krongold. I'm a resident of Costa Mesa. I'm here to speak against the sober living house that appealed the decision.
Okay, sir, so that's our first public hearing this evening, so when we come to that public hearing, that will be the time to speak on the item.
Okay.
Not right now, thank you. Okay, anyone else for public comment? All right, seeing none, that'll bring us to Planning Commissioner comments. Commissioner Zick, do you have any comments tonight?
I don't have any comments per se, but I am curious and hoping that there's some follow-up action that maybe can take place regarding the parking question that was raised. Doesn't have to happen here tonight, but is that something that can be followed up on?
Mr. Curtis.
Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to provide that information in your next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Colbert.
Thank you. I actually do have a comment tonight. I just wanted to dedicate my public comments to the life and memory of Nipsey Hussle, who was an artist that was killed last week in Crenshaw. He was a noted community activist, one who had really driven his life to community redevelopment, and unfortunately his life was taken on last week, and it has really halted the community. And so I just wanted to dedicate my memory to someone who has inspired and contributed to my life at this time.
Excellent, thank you, nice. I appreciate those comments. Commissioner Woods.
Yes, two quick comments. Number one, I noticed that at our planning meetings, the zoning code and general plan and urban plans haven't been available for the public to refer to during our meetings, so I asked them to bring it, and you'll see that now in the back of the table. You can always find the zoning code, the general plan, and the urban plans available for you to look through if you need it. The planning process isn't the most intuitive process in the world, especially if you've never participated in it, so I hope that's helpful. And the second thing is I've been tootling around with this really cool website, and it's created by the Office of Environmental Health and Hazard Assessment. It's a state agency, and what they did is they looked at all California communities and they created an Cal Enviro Screen Score. And what that is, it identifies communities that are most burdened by pollution. And the score is made up of two averages. The first average is the average of exposures and environmental effects, plus the average of sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. And so if you go on their website and you look up Costa Mesa, you'll be surprised to see that one of our West Side neighborhoods actually has the lowest score possible, which is 80 to 85%, almost the lowest score, which means that this community is actually most burdened by pollution. And some of that pollution burden is due to toxic releases, facilities that make or use toxic chemicals that can be released into the air. They have high traffic density and also a high number of cleanup sites in the area. So moving forward, I think you try to pull in as many tools as you can to evaluate projects, and I think that might be a good tool to start looking at, especially in some of our more disadvantaged neighborhoods on the West Side, when evaluating a project and looking at, how is the additional traffic going to affect this EnviroScreen score? What kinds of facilities might release toxic chemicals that would overburden this already overburdened community? And that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Woods. Vice Chair Harlan.
Oh, nothing tonight, thank you.
Okay, and I have nothing as well. Okay, and that brings us to the consent calendars. All matters listed on under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the Planning Commission staff or the public request specific items to be discussed and are removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Items removed from the consent calendar will be discussed and voted upon immediately following Planning Commission action on the remainder of the consent calendar. We have two items on the consent calendar tonight. Commissioners or the member of the public wish to pull any of those? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion on the consent calendar?
I'll move that we accept the consent calendar
Okay,
items.
moved by Vice Chair Harlan. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Colbert. Call for the question.
That motion carried 5-0.
Okay, thank you. All right, that brings us to public hearing number one. Julie, please.
Public hearing item number 1. Appeal of the Director's denial of reasonable accommodation 19-02 and 19-03 to operate a sober living facility housing up to 12 adults in 2 units with relief from certain land use requirements of the zoning code, operated by the Ohio House at 2175 Tustin Avenue, Units A and B. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Okay, Commissioners, any communications to report?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Zick.
So not specific to this application, but I did meet with this applicant subsequent to the last agenda item that we'd had with them.
Okay, anyone else? Yeah, I did receive an email contact from the applicant requesting a meeting, which I was not able to fulfill, so I did receive the invitation to meet with them, and I did not meet with them, so. Ms. Bowens-Colleen.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Willa Bowens-Colleen. I'm the zoning administrator. Tonight we have the appeal of the Director's denial of the reasonable accommodation that had been requested at 2175 Tustin Avenue for the 2 units out there, A and B, RA 1902 and 03. Before we start this hearing, I'd like to provide some background information regarding sober living homes and licensed residential treatment facilities. Under state and federal law, persons recovering from addictions to drugs and alcohol are considered disabled. The Federal Fair Housing Act amendments and the California Fair Housing Act prohibit the enforcement of zoning ordinances that would discriminate against equal housing opportunities for persons with disabilities. Accordingly, the zoning code provides that any person seeking approval to construct or operate residential housing which will substantially serve persons with disabilities may apply for reasonable accommodation to obtain relief from a zoning code provision, regulation, policy, or condition which causes a barrier to equal opportunity for housing. This means that it is important to recognize that the city cannot take actions that would treat residents who are disabled differently from residents who are not disabled. State housing law sets forth occupancy standards for residential units. These standards are very minimal, meaning the typical single-family detached home in Costa Mesa could accommodate more than 20 people under state law. The city is not allowed to impose occupancy restrictions that are more stringent than those found in state law. However, the city's housing element does include standards for overcrowding, and we are reviewing group home applications for consistency with that standard. The city carefully crafted regulations that respect federal and state laws protecting the rights of the disabled while also protecting the quality of life in the city's residential neighborhoods. The city recognizes that sober living homes do provide a benefit to the community in that they offer persons recovering from addiction the opportunity to live in a comfortable residential environment. However, these facilities are often dissimilar to other households in the neighborhoods in that they house all adults. The residents tend to live in the home for a relatively short period of time and often don't establish ties in the community. The facilities do not operate as single housekeeping units in that the residents generally have no say about who lives in the facility, and the number of occupants, while consistent with state housing law, is often higher than the typical household size in Costa Mesa, creating additional demands on city infrastructure and parking. For these reasons, the city decided to impose a separation requirement between facilities to avoid an overconcentration of sober living homes in any neighborhood. Not only does this standard preserve the character of the city's neighborhoods, it ensures that the needs of the disabled are addressed by allowing them to live in homes in traditional neighborhoods, as opposed to a more institutional setting that might result if sober living homes were clustered in the same area. The city requires any sober living home to be at least 650 feet from any property that contains a group home, sober living home, or state-licensed drug and alcohol treatment facility. Sober living homes and licensed residential treatment facilities are limited to 6 residents plus a house manager in single-family zones. Facilities licensed by the state to serve 6 or fewer residents are exempt from city regulation, other than those regulations that apply generally to all other dwellings. Facilities that are not licensed must obtain a special use permit from the city. In multifamily zones, facilities serving more than 6 residents require approval of a conditional use permit by the city, whether or not they have been licensed by the state. Operators of facilities of 7 or more that are not licensed by the state are required to obtain an operator's permit from the city. As part of this permit, the city requires the operator and staff to undergo a live scan background check. In addition, a house manager or staff member must be present at all times, and any resident who is evicted or whose residency is involuntarily terminated must be offered transportation to the resident's permanent address. A sober living home is not allowed to provide treatment services, counseling, or other services without a license from the State Department of Health Care Services. The application before you tonight involves sober living facilities. In May 2017, the City Council adopted an ordinance modifying some of the existing standards for group homes and licensed residential treatment facilities. Now, the city is required to provide notice of public hearings for these facilities to residents or tenants within 500 feet of the site, in addition to property owners. Such notice was provided for the hearing tonight. The grounds that are to be considered in determining whether to grant a reasonable accommodation were expanded. In addition, applicants are required to ensure operations comply with all provisions of the California Vehicle Code, such as those addressing parking and stopping. Operators must comply with additional requirements intended to minimize the chance for evicted residents to become homeless if the resident is unwilling to return home. The operator must contact the county and the city's network for homeless solutions to determine if services are available for the resident and to provide transportation to a facility that has a bed available. Of course, the operator cannot compel a resident to take advantage of the transportation. The item before you is an appeal of reasonable accommodation RA 1902 and 1903. The application for accommodation was denied by the Development Services Director. The applicant has appealed that decision to the Planning Commission. The site currently operates as a sober living facility. Staff confirmed the use in early 2014. There are 2 units on this single parcel. The site houses up to 12 residents and 2 live-in managers. Since early 2014, there have been 4 complaints to code enforcement expressing concern with excessive smoke and 1 regarding trash and debris. The trash and debris issue was corrected immediately. Additionally, there have been a total of 5 calls for service in the last 5 years, all of which are attributable to the property. These calls for service related primarily to disturbances, with 1 call for found property and 1 call for medical aid. Staff also received a total of 8 emails in response to the notice for this meeting protesting the project. The applicant had submitted a special use permit application for both units, stating that no more than 6 persons beside the live-in managers reside in each unit. However, because the 2 units are on a single parcel and more than 6 people reside on the parcel, a CUP is required under the zoning code. And just to clarify, the denial was not appealed in a timely manner, so tonight's discussion is solely on the request for the reasonable accommodation. And as I just stated, through various correspondence, staff notified the applicant that a CUP was required. However, they confirmed that they opted to continue with the special use permits. Staff notified the applicant that additional information was needed to deem the applications complete, but the information was not submitted. Consequently, because the use at the property does require a CUP, both of the special use permits were denied. And as I mentioned earlier, applicant did not appeal the denial in a timely manner, so tonight's hearing is solely on the reasonable accommodation denials. The property is located on the west side of Tustin Avenue between 21st and 22nd Street. The area contains a mix of traditional single-family homes and detached single-family homes on small lots. The subject property is zoned R2 medium density, which is multiple family residential at a medium density. The 700 square foot lot would support up to 3 dwelling units. The property contains 2 detached single-family, single-story residences, the front constructed in 1910 and the rear constructed in 1963. No garages or other covered parking exists for this property. And as I noted earlier, staff first became aware of the use when complaints regarding this facility were received in early 2014. The applicant has requested a reasonable accommodation that the city treat these individual units, such as single-family uses, waive the 650-foot separation requirements, grandfather each as a legal non-conforming use because it was in place before ordinance number 1511 was adopted, and treat the residents of each as a single housekeeping unit. The director determined that not all of the required findings to approve the request for reasonable accommodation could be made. Consequently, the request for accommodation was denied based on the following reasons. First, the director found that approval of this request is not necessary to allow disabled to use a dwelling in Costa Mesa. Excuse me. There was no justification provided to support the request to grandfather the facility or consider the residents of the facility to be a single housekeeping unit. Indeed, the Costa Mesa Municipal Code includes amortization provisions for group homes that were in operation at the time Ordinance 1511 was adopted. All such homes were required to come into compliance within 1 year. The city has adopted standards for sober living homes in residential zones to ensure the disabled have the opportunity to live in a typical residential neighborhood. The permit process ensures that sober living homes comply with the city standards. The city specifically required all group homes to comply with the new regulations within 1 year. The applicant failed to provide a basis to grandfather this facility when all other facilities are required to comply with the established terms laid forth in the city's municipal code. The applicant's description of the sober living homes at this location is inconsistent with the city's definition of a single housekeeping unit. The city has established procedures to allow group homes in residential neighborhoods. Allowing a group home to be considered as a single housekeeping unit is not necessary to allow the disabled to reside in residential neighborhoods. Number 2, the applicant did not demonstrate that the accommodation is consistent with surrounding uses in scale and intensity. The applicant presented no evidence that the subject facility operates as a single housekeeping unit, making it dissimilar to the composition of households on surrounding properties. The facility is occupied solely by adults at a higher occupancy than is typical in Costa Mesa. Nevertheless, the municipal code established standards and procedures to allow sober living facilities in residential neighborhoods. The facility does not comply with city standards for parking. The applicant did not demonstrate that accommodation is necessary to allow persons with disabilities an equal opportunity to live in a residential setting. Excuse me. The city has received applications for 63 sober living homes and 11 licensed treatment facilities that are subject to compliance with ordinances number 1413 and 1511. 12 sober living homes serving 6 or fewer residents have been approved by the city, and 2 sober living homes serving 7 or more residents have been approved. In addition, there are 76 state-licensed drug and alcohol residential care facilities in Costa Mesa that are exempt from city regulation or have already obtained the required conditional use permit. No evidence has been submitted to indicate that the number of sober living homes and drug and alcohol residential care facilities existing or potentially allowed in compliance with the city standards is inadequate. Here, the existing facility would potentially be allowed in compliance with the zoning code with a CUP without the need to deviate from the provisions of the zoning code. Finally, the director was not able to find that approval of this accommodation would not alter the city's zoning program. The city's regulations seek to ensure that disabled persons recovering from addiction can reside in a comfortable residential environment versus in an institutional setting. The city has carefully crafted regulations to allow group homes, including sober living homes, to be located in residential neighborhoods. The intent of these regulations is to ensure that facilities maintain compatibility with the residential neighborhood in which they are situated, ensure standards of operation, and establish distance requirements that would prevent overconcentration of sober living units in a neighborhood. The approval of this request would lead to a fundamental alteration of the city's zoning program. Almost there. The director determined that a conditional use permit was required based with the number of residents at the property, which, although it contains 2 units, is a single parcel of land, and denied the reasonable accommodation because he could not make all the required findings set forth in the zoning code, including the finding that the requested accommodations were not necessary because the existing use could be conditionally approvable under the zoning code. Consequently, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to uphold the director's decision to deny a reasonable accommodation to allow the facility to deviate from various land use standards. And truly, I will be available to respond to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
So Ms. Bowens-Clean, thank you for soldiering on through your report. Commissioners, any questions of staff at the moment?
I have just a quick one.
Commissioner Woods.
Let's see, on handwritten page 17 and 20, it looks like it's a attachment that was submitted to Costa Mesa. And so on handwritten page 17, under the first paragraph, there's 4 things that they said they provided. Did they provide a copy of the group home rules and regulations, intake procedures, relapse policy, and the blank forms that residents and potential residents are required to complete?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not positive. The requirement for the reasonable accommodation doesn't include those items.
Got it.
Since the SUP had been denied, I did not review for those items.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, seeing no other questions, I will open the public hearing, and I do have to read a statement into the record before we begin public comment. And this is important. People recovering from alcoholism or drug addiction are considered disabled under federal law so long as they are not currently using. They are protected under the law and they are protected under the law, and they should be treated with the same respect we all want to be treated with. People in recovery have a right to live in residential neighborhoods, and we are serious about protecting that right. We also know that poorly run group homes can be damaging to the community and dangerous to their residents. If an operation is having a negative impact on your community because of nuisance behaviors, or if you believe it is endangering its residents, please tell us about specific problems. But we will not entertain comments that people in recovery do not belong in our community. We do not condone and we will not take part in discrimination. Thank you. So I will ask the applicant to come forward, please, or the applicant's representative. Yes, sirs. Yes, sirs, plural.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Garrett Pribble on behalf of applicant Ohio House.
Ryan Stump, COO, Ohio House. I'd like to first start by thanking you, Mr. Zick, for your time after that last meeting. I felt that we had a really constructive conversation. Wish I could say the same about the other ones that I'd reached out to. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But once again, I do appreciate the time. So for this one, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we were up here 30 days ago talking about a very similar issue that has nothing to do with tonight, but we can go through the whole process of the paperwork that was submitted to the city, how you guys process that. We can answer any questions that you have with that. Look forward to doing it. At the same time, I feel like for us to support your goal of finding resolution here, it can simply be a conversation. I want to open this up to make it a conversation with you to get a better understanding of how we can support your goals as it relates to the Ohio House in the city of Costa Mesa. Because I've got legal counsel here and elsewhere that they want to settle this stuff in court. We don't want to do that. We want to work with you as people. Mr. Zick, for example, when we sat down, he got a much better understanding of what our program is all about and what recovery is all about as a whole. And I think that it would be extremely beneficial if we could do the same with the rest of the commission and whoever needs to ask the proper questions, whoever needs to get a better understanding of exactly what we are about, because at the end of the day, that's how you get things done, is working person to person. So whatever we can do to support that, please let us know.
Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you all. I just wanted to focus for a minute on the agenda report and the required findings that the Planning Commission took issue with, notably 2, 4, 7, and 8, beginning on page 6, handwritten number 6 at the bottom there. Well, really, the issue really is more or less with 7 and 8. So at the bottom of page 6, you see 7, whether the existing supply of facilities of a similar nature and operation in the community is sufficient to provide individuals with a disability an equal opportunity to live in a residential setting. Now, you open this meeting this evening, with references to the fact that these individuals residing in these properties are protected under federal law as a disabled class. But these required findings tend to take some of these standards and just kind of turn them on their head under the FHA. And so I submit to the Planning Commission here today to perhaps help applicants such as Ohio House and attorneys like myself who work on their behalf to genuinely try and meet these findings and help educate us on what it is that we could submit to this commission that would actually result in a finding in the positive on number 7. What is it that the Planning Commission is looking for? How is it that an applicant can show or demonstrate that the existing supply of facilities is sufficient or insufficient for us to make that finding? And it's problematic when you read the Planning Commission's or the staff's description or justification on the next page, handwritten page 7. The city has received applications for 63 sober living homes and 11 licensed treatment facilities. Well, just as a preliminary matter, Ohio House provides a sober living environment. It's not any sort of treatment. So the fact that we are now justifying the denial here based on the existing supply and conflating residential treatment with sober living homes kind of right away is a red flag. Are we supposed to then go and survey the community of all residential treatment centers? And how many residential treatment centers and sober living homes would there have to be for us to then be able to demonstrate that the existing supply is insufficient? It's such a vague requirement, and it's a required finding. Keep in mind, all 8 of these findings are required. Should we not be able to meet any one of these, the reasonable accommodation per 13-620 or 260 of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code, you all have to deny our request. And I do take issue with some of the other ones, and I've expressed this in the past, but number 7 really is kind of one that you can kind of take the highlighter out and look at it and think, there's really no way for us to ever demonstrate to you all that the existing supply isn't sufficient so that to convince you to grant our reasonable accommodation request. So long as we have one other home in the community, it seems that there would be a basis to deny this. And so we would like some clarification on what it would be that the Planning Commission looks to when analyzing required finding number 7 within the Costa Mesa Municipal Code to come to this determination. Reading further through your justification, though, it's also confusing. I mean, it gets more confusing as you read further into it. You're conflating sober living homes and licensed treatment centers to support the denial that the existing supply is sufficient, and so this accommodation doesn't need to be requested. And then it goes and references ordinances 1413 and 1511. And so I come back to whatever the geographical distinction is that we're looking at here. Are we looking just at Costa Mesa? Let's say we are looking at just Costa Mesa. Well, this home is in the 1511 zone. This is a multi-family zone, and so the reasonable accommodation would be granted under the reasonable accommodation process as referenced under Ordinance 1511's amendments to the code. But we're referencing here in the justification facilities that are subject to compliance with Ordinances 1413 and 1511. And so as the applicant, where does that leave us? Are we supposed to go and survey both the R1 and the R2 and the R3 zones and figure out how many not only sober living homes and licensed treatment centers exist across the city, and then try and parse it out? And even if we were able to do that, then what? Are we supposed to go to each and every one of our clients and say, okay, hypothetically speaking, you've got 60 days left. We got a cease and desist from the city. I need you all to go out and find somewhere else to live and report back to us. And if you all can't find somewhere else to live, then we might have the necessary evidence to present to the Planning Commission or the City Council under required finding 7 that the existing supply is in fact insufficient. It just leaves out so many kind of open-ended ways for the city to come back with this sort of response each and every time. And we just feel, and I feel, and I've represented many applicants here, that there really is no way for us to ever meet that. Everything else aside, I know we're not talking about the CUP here today or the SUPs. I know we're not talking about necessarily the other 4 findings that weren't included in this denial letter, but this process takes what the Fair Housing Act has carefully delineated as a reasonable accommodation process. It's supposed to be an individual analysis. And the city's taken this kind of template and interjected it into every denial. And so we do take issue with that. And moving forward, I would be interested to hear what you all have to say as the individuals making this determination. What is it that you would look for here? What is it that an applicant like Ohio House could show you? And that's just for number 7. If you'd all like to engage in that conversation, I can stop now, or I can continue on to the other ones that I take issue with. I leave it up to you, how you'd like me to proceed.
Please continue with your presentation.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Number 8, the requested accommodation will not result in a fundamental alteration in the nature of the city's zoning program. Well, by definition, by the city's own definition of single housekeeping unit, as amended, I think, under 1301 and then again under 1413, it is crafted in a way so that a group home cannot meet that definition. Yet this home was there prior to the enactment of Ordinance 1413 and prior to the enactment of Ordinance 1511 and 1705. And so to say that a home that each has 5 adults and a 3-bedroom property, respectively, it would require a fundamental alteration in the nature of the city's zoning code. We think that if you were to come out and actually take a look at the property, you'd see that, in fact, it's directly in character with the rest of the neighborhood. And going back to required finding number 4, that plays right into what I was just speaking about. The requested accommodation is not consistent with surrounding uses in scale and intensity. And the city says, the Planning Commission says, you've presented no evidence that the facility operates as a single housekeeping unit. Well, of course not. We've been defined out of ever proving to you that we are a single housekeeping unit. But if you were to come and actually look at the home and meet the individuals or observe the happenings on a day-to-day basis, I submit to you, you would find that it, in fact, is no different than the average home on that block. And going back to the other required finding that we take issue with, 2, and this is, again, one of the central ones that we've taken issue with in the past. I personally have on behalf of other applicants. The requested accommodation is necessary to provide 1 or more individuals with a disability an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. That's not the standard. It never has been the standard. The standard is, and it makes sense that that's not the standard, because if that were the standard under a reasonable accommodation process, you're asking the city for an accommodation, and you're saying, well, we don't need to make that accommodation because you can go do that somewhere else. Again, this turns the process upside down. We're not asking for an accommodation so that the individuals residing at this property can go live somewhere else. The purpose of the process and the reason it's an individualized analysis is because we are looking to provide an accommodation for the individual's use and enjoyment of that specific property. So, between these 2, 4, 7, 8, these 4 findings, we feel that not only is it reverse engineered, especially number 7, which conflates a number of these findings to create an impossible standard, but ultimately, this entire process is designed so that we don't actually engage in a good faith open dialogue. Because if you all were to take Mr. Stump up on his offer, as Commissioner Zick did, and go down and, well, I don't know actually what the nature of the meeting was, but if you were to take Mr. Stump up on his offer and go down and look at the property and actually observe what the day-to-day activity is like in that neighborhood, I think that you'd be surprised that actually, in fact, a lot of these justifications don't apply. As to number 7, again, I don't know how we can ever meet that. And my final parting comments would be that based on the nature of this denial, if the city is inclined to deny this, as I imagine you are based on reading through this agenda report, that the Planning Commission articulate a basis for denying both. Because if the Commission does deny as to one of the units, A, then it seems that the separation conflict is no longer an issue, unless I'm misunderstanding this report. And so we'd be curious to know why, if both were denied, what the basis therefore would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Brandon Stump, co-founder of the Ohio House. Good to see you all. Couple things that you touched on that I think I just want to vocalize in the room tonight. I think there's a common misconception on the difference between sober living and treatment. You had mentioned there's 76 licensed treatment facilities in the city of Costa Mesa that are, I don't know what the word is, but they're, what's the word? They're allowed to continue doing business. This type of thing doesn't affect them. They
don't have separation conflict.
Yeah. So some people will look at a sober living and say, oh, they're not licensed. Like they're doing something illegally. We could spend the $7,500 for each one of our properties and contact the state of California and get these as licensed treatment facilities. There's a reason why we haven't done that. Sure, we could do that. We'd probably save some legal fees and save some time. But then we would have to alter what it is that we do best. And we provide sober living. We don't provide in-house treatment. We're not billing insurance for people to live in our houses. We're not doing 24/7 treatment, residential treatment in those houses. Sure, we could change our model and we could do that. And that's actually been a topic of conversation. But we don't. We do sober living and we help people get their lives back. And I come here tonight and I really, honestly, I look at these reasonable accommodations and CUPs and the process and I really want to believe that there's a reason that we're here tonight other than to just come show up, get a denial, and move about our business and go on to the next phase, which is this and that, and then the court. But it's really hard to believe that this is actually set up for us to have a chance. I'm sure that the usual committee will step up to the microphone and have nothing but terrible things to say about our program. If we wanted to send a message to the city, we would have our meeting at Angel Stadium and we would fill every seat with the lives that we've affected for the positive in this world, and they would show up. But like I said, I don't feel like this is, I do want to believe that there's a reason for all this. And, you know, when you talk about the integrity of the neighborhood, I find it interesting that I'm standing up here with my brother defending our sober living programs that help people get their lives back. But on every single corner, there's a massage parlor giving out hand jobs for anyone that shows up with $50 in this city, in this neighborhood that your integrity is to define to save the neighborhood. I don't know what the CUP or SUP process is for human trafficking or prostitution, but I know there's no 600-foot radius rule for it because they're everywhere, right here, okay? And the motel situation, open drug market, every single corner. You can go stay in a hotel room in your city and sell drugs and do drugs with absolutely no consequences. There's no 600-foot rule. They're right next door to each other. And that's in this city. And we're standing up here protecting what we do, which is change the world for the better. I find it very interesting. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've got one question, and it stems from a letter written on May 31st, and this was by Stephen Poland, the author of this letter. May 31st, 2018. It's on page 28 of our staff report. I'll let you find the letter. Do you see the letter?
I do.
Okay. My question is, in the first paragraph, you indicate that, excuse me, that you have submitted a group home application, and then just a couple lines below that, you acknowledge and recognize that all sober living operators are required to submit applications for conditional use permit. My question is, have you ever submitted an application for a conditional use permit for this property? That's my question.
My understanding of how this process went down with Mr. Poland's involvement was that 2 separate special use permits were submitted because...
So that's not my question. My question is referencing this letter, which you, not you personally, you've written, which indicates an acknowledgement that a conditional use permit application...
a CUP has not been submitted on that property.
Okay.
I might have seen this in here.
That was your question, right?
That was my question.
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Woods?
I'm not sure if you guys can answer this, or maybe our attorney. But first of all, I just want to say, look, this isn't a decision based on whether you guys are good guys, good operators, bad operators. I don't doubt that you guys are good guys, and you're very passionate about what you do, and that's conveyed. It was conveyed the last time you were here, and it certainly is again. So my question for you, have you applied for a California state license for this property? And have you applied for a California state license to operate a sober living home for this property?
A California state license for sober living?
To operate a group living home? Or
I don't know. I need clarity there.
So now, then maybe I'll do it with our
Sure, yeah.
attorney. So it's my understanding that if you have a home with 6 or less residents, you can apply to get licensing through the state of California to operate a group sober living homes.
Commissioner Woods, there are many different types of licenses that are available for 6 or fewer residences, either through the Department of Social Services or specifically the Department of Healthcare Services. 6 or fewer residential treatment facilities for drug and alcohol dependency are licensed by Department of Healthcare Services. But those are for a higher level of care.
Okay.
The sober living homes that are permitted through the city do not allow that type of treatment. So if there's treatment that's going on that's requires a state license, then that would need to be done. But you don't have to have a state license in order to operate a sober living home.
Got it. Okay. Right.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We may have some questions for you after public comment, so I appreciate your presentation. And we'll ask the public if they wish to speak on this to please come forward. Please come forward. And if you're in line, just take, you can either stand right there, that'll be perfect, so we can move it along. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So as a resident of the neighborhood, I'm actually going to change what I have to say based on what I just heard. The first gentleman spoke almost with veiled threats that he doesn't understand, so he may have to now start taking legal action. And they haven't really done all the appeal process properly. They haven't filled out their paperwork properly. They haven't asked for everything that needs to be done. So it makes me question how they actually are able to run a business. And then also this woe is me, there's massage parlors and hotels and everything else around. We're not talking about that. We're not deflecting from this issue. This is a 14-person adult-only property, 150 feet from a Boys and Girls Club, from communities with small children, from a school, and they expect just, hey, it's okay because of laws built in the 70s on FHA. This is not about discrimination. This is about what's right for a community. Right now, this area is the safest part of Costa Mesa at Tustin and Santiago. And now what we're saying is let's put in a 12-person adult home plus 2 managers with no parking, and it's a woe is me. And it's just very frustrating to see people who might operate a business who don't seem to know what they're doing, who have an attorney that only asks questions of you but doesn't present any evidence. And this is the type of people we want running a business in a residential community. It's actually kind of scary. Thank you.
Thank you. No demonstrations, please. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name's Mike Steger. I live at 2437 Windward, 3 houses down from 3175 Tustin. And I'm representing 25 homeowners, all within 500 feet of the subject property, that have signed a petition supporting the denial of the application for reasonable accommodation at 2175 Tustin. And the facts and findings that we believe support that are, one, it's not reasonable, practical, safe, sanitary to house 14 adults in these two small structures. Secondly, it's inconsistent with nearby uses, a park for young children, elementary school, and a boys and girls club. Also, the accommodation is not consistent with the surrounding uses in scale, intensity, or density, and also fundamentally alters the character of the neighborhood. And the requested accommodation of 14 adults will result in a substantial increase in traffic and further contribute to existing parking problems. It will also add to the existing issues of loitering, secondhand smoke, and loud cell conversations. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Mark Buchanan. I live on Catalina Shore Drive, immediately adjacent to the sober living home. And it was interesting to hear all this, and I'm interested to see how the trade-offs have come about over the years. Of course, we'd rather not have any of this element adjacent to us, but I recognize the need and the balancing act that the city has gone through to come up with the standard of basically interspersing 6 people throughout the city, 650 feet apart. I don't know how anybody came up with that. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it seems reasonable to me. Living immediately adjacent to the facility, though, the trade-off, the offset of accommodating the people who are trying to get their lives together is that in the time I've lived there, we've had like 30 or 40 kids born and grown up on the street. Kids don't play in our street without their parents out watching them, partly because of concerns about this facility next door. One resident who was an original owner moved away a couple of years ago because when this sober living home opened, first she put a wall up so they couldn't look into her bedroom windows, and then she moved away, sold her house and left because she wasn't comfortable being there. So that's just an example of the trade-offs that go along with trying to both do the right thing by people trying to get their lives together and looking out for the people who live here and want to live in Costa Mesa where it's a safe, family-oriented place. So I'd just like to thank the staff for rejecting the waiver, and I hope that you guys will support that tonight.
Thank you.
Oh, I love it
Yes.
when the neighbors come and speak up, especially petitions. That was really smart. So don't you love it that these people came up and said that they're no different than any other house on that block? Well, I've lived in this neighborhood since 1974, and I can tell you this house sticks out like a sore thumb. The minute they opened, we knew it was a sober living house. I called Mike Tucker. The guys were hanging out on the porch, smoking and vaping. You know, there are teenagers in our neighborhood, but they don't all sit around. They don't sit out in the cars across the street screaming on their cell phones. They don't tear down the driveway. The guys pull in, but then they back up really fast. And they do not look out for the little people that are walking along, the young mothers and dog walkers. They don't even stop. I've had several calls about this on this particular property. And you know, it's really interesting. The city of Dana Point, their ordinance, you cannot have a sober living house in that city unless you are state licensed. Why can't Costa Mesa do something like that? And why don't they want a state license? You know why? Because then there would be oversight, and someone might look into their finances. There's no oversight for these operators like Keith Randall and the Ohio House. Nobody knows who's getting paid what, and I don't know if you noticed it, but over the weekend, there were, I'm not saying it was from this home, but there were a lot of young men curbed all over Costa Mesa and passed out on the sidewalks. I saw 2 on the way here tonight. This does not fit in this particular neighborhood. These 2 gentlemen that are running this house, they're not there all the time. I never see them at that house. They are not watching those guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I wasn't prepared to come speak to you about this subject, but after listening to the gentleman speak, I feel kind of compelled to stand up for the residents of Costa Mesa. First of all, the residents of Costa Mesa have shown a lot of passion. They just opened a shelter for the homeless, and that required that our council members build a lot of community. They spent a lot of time going out to the community, talking to a lot of the residents, specifically the ones that were going to be mostly impacted. And I heard the gentleman say that they wanted to engage with you guys, but they need to engage with the community. I have yet to see sober living homes owners build a coalition where they actually have town halls and invite the public to come and talk and build that community to support sober living homes, or at least so they can get the message to understand where the residents stand on that. But the bottom line is that the applicants haven't followed the rules, and they shouldn't be allowed to have this, because we need to start following the rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Attilio Giovanato. I live on Catalina Shore Drive, a few houses down from Mark. I've been there for, I think it's 1997. I support the director's denial. I don't know all the specifics. I just learned about this a few days ago. But any increase in those two particular homes, it's too much. They live in bunk beds per room, and I understand that. But if you look at the homes, I don't know what the square footage is, combined, it can't be more than 3,000 square feet. And you're going to put 6 guys in each home, and the back unit, I just don't understand how the operators could think that they could squeeze 12 men in those 2 small homes and expect them to live there in the area that they live with the congestion that we already have from a development next to us and some more developments in the area. It's just too much for one small area. And if you look at the map, Kaiser Elementary School, Boys and Girls Club, and then a park, and the park is actually for small children, 6 and under. If it was in a different area, maybe, but this is not the place considering the location and the surroundings. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Yes, sir.
Roger Alford, 1862 Tustin. Stand by the petition that was submitted by Mike Steger. And after listening to what's been said, it's simple as the gentlemen have to follow the rules. There are laws, and the Planning Commission usually will stay by the rules and laws that they have made, and for reasons that we don't discuss tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. I wasn't originally coming to actually make a statement, but I feel compelled to do so just based on what I'm hearing today. You know, sir, I heard your comments around discrimination, and so I want to have an open mind. There was also a comment that was made in setting up today's public hearing around, you know, a lack of ties to the community. I can tell you some facts that I've seen based on behaviors displayed from occupants of this home. And so, you know, in our neighborhood on Anderson Lane, you know, everyone has security cameras. I would argue it's because of this home. And, you know, I actually, just to share a personal story, am divorced from someone who is a recovering addict who also lived in a sober home. And so one thing you can't account for when someone's recovering or the people in the company that they keep, right? It takes a village. Both to raise a person in a positive way, but also it takes a village to raise someone who actually contributes to an addiction. And so it's one thing to manage and govern the people in this area, but also you have to think and take into consideration the people who they're bringing into the community who have no ties to our area. We've seen an increase in poor behavior, I would say, from people staying at that home. You know, I've seen people, you know, as far as curfews not being governed, the management of that home not being governed. You know, people are sitting out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in their vehicles. right outside the house. You can't walk your dog. Your child can't leave the home, just because there's people sitting out there, cursing and using all kinds of obscenities when there's children walking around. Very concerned around the poor behavior that we're seeing. I see people who are parked in front of that house in the middle of the night go up and down our neighborhood looking inside car windows on our cameras, and you can actually watch them walk back to that house. And so that's very concerning for me as well. The last thing that I would say as I look at some of the comments that were made, including from the owners, when I see these poor behaviors as far as curfew and as far as governing the people at this home at all hours of the night, one thing I haven't seen is these two gentlemen in our community, raising awareness. They can state that all they want, but they're simply not there, governing these people. And it seems, in their comments that they're running this like a business for a profit. When you use fancy titles like COO, when you talk about, hey, we're here to change our business model, but it's not really cost effective, it doesn't sound like people who are willing to invest in the community to make sure that people are here to be recover from addiction. They're looking to make a profit. And, it concerns me as a father and as someone who cares about this neighborhood that people are worried about the bottom line as opposed to managing this environment so it's a productive part of the community. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Jeremy Kingerl. I'm with the Ohio House. I just want to touch base on a couple things that were said that are, I just want to clarify. Number one, it was in number 4 originally and keeps getting brought up. Well, first of all, this whole thing, we should, we're not bringing anything new here. This is already here. So everybody who's talking about the addition of more people or things like causing more problems or, somebody mentioned that this was the safest part of Costa Mesa. We're here now. I mean, it's not going to get any more unsafe because we're here. We're here now. So that's the first thing. We're not adding anything new. The second thing, parking. That I want to clarify. We're not adding any parking problems to Tustin right now. That driveway is long, is all get-go. There is sort of an attached garage there. We don't park in it, but there's parking structure or places to park before it, and guys park alongside it. So the number of cars that need to park there, I mean, we only need like a car or two in front of the house, if that. They all park there fine. As far as the number of people there, we keep talking about like, you're talking 7, you're talking 12. Those houses, that's full occupancy. We don't house that many people there. Like I think right now there are 4 people in each house. I'd say that's pretty average there. I don't remember it ever being more than 6 people in a house, not ever. That may be what the application stated, but that's not what our occupancy ever is. As far as curfews go, that really bothers me personally. We do have stated curfews. We have house managers, live-in house managers, in both the front house and the back house. They're supposed to be watching curfews constantly. Then we have, you mentioned the stumps not being there. Well, of course, the principals are not going to be out at the sober livings on a daily basis. We have house managers there, and then we have what are called captains. The captains oversee the house managers. We've got a structure, and we've got house rules. They're uniform. They're for all the houses. I wrote them years ago. I was a house manager for 5.5 years at the, I emailed each of you guys after the last meeting. My name's Jeremy Tingarrow. John, you responded to me. I may email you guys again after this one. but I just wanted to clarify some of that stuff. We are the gold standard of sober living. Oh, one last thing. Sober livings do not get state licensed. They do
So
not.
if you could direct your comments to the commission?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Yep.
Sober livings do not get state licensed. There
Okay.
isn't such a thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zick.
a quick question for Jeremy, and I apologize for not knowing the answer. Are you one of the house managers or one of the residents?
I was a house manager for 5.5 years. I've since become the CFO of a treatment center,
Okay, thank
Buckeye
you.
Recovery Network Treatment Center.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, I will ask if the applicant or the applicant's representative wish to make any rebuttal comments or closing remarks. Yes, sir, Mr. Stump.
Yeah, just one thing real quick. I think it was Ms. Woods, you had a question earlier about submission of the rules, the intake process, and all of that, and to one of the gentleman's points saying that we failed to submit everything, not only in a timely manner, but all the materials. That was submitted, and I have time-stamped submission folders for every single thing that's turned in there, and the reason that they are time-stamped is it's not abnormal for city staff to lose some of this material because of how much paperwork goes along with it. So I have that information for you if you'd like it. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, any further questions of staff before I close the public hearing?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you. Any staff, please respond to this. I want to get some clarification on the reasonable accommodation process as opposed to the CUP process. So my understanding of reasonable accommodation is elective, that's a choice an applicant may pursue. They're not obligated to request a reasonable accommodation, and that is separate and distinct from the CUP process.
Yes, that's correct. The requirement for a conditional use permit or any other use permit of that sort is identified in the code. The reasonable accommodation is a request that the applicant makes to deviate from code standards in this case.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions? So I have a couple. So I want to try to have an understanding. The applicant submitted applications for special use permits. I'm assuming under the belief that their belief that the two facilities were separate housekeeping units, then they then fell within the requirements of the code for an SUP rather than a CUP. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so the reasonable accommodation request was was that subsequent to the denial of the SUP, or was it concurrent with?
It was filed concurrently.
Okay.
And just
and the reasonable accommodation request was to deviate from the SUP requirements 6 or fewer, or the city's opinion was that this was an integral facility rather than 2 separate housekeeping units.
That's correct, but the reasonable accommodation was filed because they wanted, there were several points, the grandfathering, the, sorry, my brain is blanking, but the points that were brought out in the presentation. It wasn't a separation issue, but it was the grandfathering and the other issue, a single housekeeping unit.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I will close the public hearing unless any commissioners have any questions or comments, and bring it back to the dais and ask for comments, motions. Anyone? Not all at once. Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to uphold the director's decision and deny the request for reasonable accommodation 1902 and 1903, and I have comments if there's a second.
Okay, and then I'm not seconding, Mr. Zick, if you will just articulate for the record that you are making your motion based on the findings in the staff report denying the reasonable accommodation.
That is true. My motion is based on the findings in the record.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Woods. Commissioner Zick, go ahead with your comments.
Well, so I got a lot of comments. We received a lot of comments, and I appreciate that. In terms of some of the sentiment that I hear from residents, whether you're immediately adjacent to a sober living home or not, these occupants are not criminals. They haven't broken a law. They're not felons. They're not violent. They're not dangerous. And the parks in your neighborhood aren't just for kids. They're for anybody that lives in the city and wants to recreate. Little kid, big kid, parent, grandparent. Smoking is not a crime. We've gotten some complaints about that effect of sober living homes. I don't like smoke, but it's not a crime. And running a business isn't a crime, whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit. It's not a crime to be running a business. It's not a bad thing. If it happens to be a business they're running, so be it. That doesn't make it objectionable. But that said, this is a sophisticated operator. This isn't one person operating one facility. It's a sophisticated operator. And my expectation of a sophisticated operator is that they have a sophisticated operation, that they understand the rules, they understand the codes, and they follow them. They would know the difference between an SUP and a CUP. They would know the difference between a group home and a sober living home. They would know the difference between a licensed and an unlicensed facility. I'd expect them to know that. To submit an application for reasonable accommodation that says, by the way, I really don't want to follow any of the city's municipal codes. I got a problem with that. You want to run a sober living home? We've got a process for it. I can't help you through the 8 criteria for reasonable accommodation and help you navigate a way to make that criteria fit you so you don't have to comply with the municipal code. What I can do is suggest you follow the process for a conditional use permit that the city has laid out. And according to the staff report, the indication is one of the big limitations that many of the sober living homes have had is this 650-foot proximity requirement. You don't seem to have that as an issue with your location, this specific location. So I'm not saying you get a CUP approved, but that's the process. And to do anything other than that, I'm sorry, I'm just not really sympathetic to the trouble that you've had trying to get a reasonable accommodation approved. You know, our chairman started out with some language talking about the federal disabilities and the way we treat people that have these disabilities, and the benefit that the sober living homes have in helping these recovering individuals. This is a really important service that you provide. I'm supportive of that. But we've got rules. They're fairly straightforward. They're fairly simple to follow. You resist them, you're not going to get a whole lot of sympathy from me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioners, any comments and additional comments? Commissioner Colbert, please.
Yes, just very briefly. Brandon, thank you for, again, your service, and I would like to reiterate that that's not something, just because I did not meet with you is no indication of my lack of understanding, nor my lack of sympathy or desire to see services like this continue to happen within communities across this country. it's imperative, as Commissioner Zick has stated, that we not only follow the rules that are indicated, but that's something that I thought that I would see here that I did not see, which will be reflected in my vote this evening. And I would just like to also, I would like to meet with you, and I am open to that discussion to learn more about the services that take place within the community. And I would like to state publicly that I apologize for not responding to your email. But due to the nuances and the legalities of this, I would like for our communications to maintain, to be stated in a public forum. So I would like to state publicly that I would like to meet with you. And also, so moving forward, I look forward to working with the city and whomever else to see what we can do to provide services or to allow for the type of work that you do to continue to happen within this community. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Colbert. Do you have any comments? Did you have additional comments, Commissioner Woods? Or did you not make any? And I'm asleep at the switch here.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to concur with Commissioner Zick. I really appreciate that you talked about folks in recovery are not criminals. They're not a threat to our children. I certainly don't think that they're a threat to my kids. I've seen adults consuming ridiculous amounts of alcohol in front of children, and I have a bigger problem with that than someone who's sober. But during the hearing, the applicants did not provide any additional evidence to justify a reversal of denial. And that's why I am I'm in support of the motion, and I concur with staff findings. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Harlan.
I'll concur with my colleagues' I think very thoughtful and well laid out explanation. I too believe that this is pretty much a procedural issue. And what I do want to say is that I do not welcome the appeal from the applicants about asking the Planning Commission to in some way intervene and explain for you how to go through the process. That's very troubling to me because the role of the Planning Commission is not to put ourselves in the position of staff. We're supposed to evaluate the information that's put before us, including public testimony. And so tonight, for me, it's not about the substantive issue of whether or not we should allow sober living homes. I think we've discussed that exhaustively. It's as simple as, did you follow the process? And like Commissioner Wood said, I don't believe that there's been any evidence presented that the denial should be overcome.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So on a couple of notes, I did exchange some emails with Mr. Stump, who requested to meet with me. I denied meeting with him only because there's ongoing litigation between the city and Ohio House, and I didn't think that it was smart for me to do that. Didn't have anything to do with them, or I just didn't want to put myself in that position. With respect to the reasons for upholding the director's denial, I think Commissioner Zick laid it out pretty well. And Vice Chair Harlan touched on it. There's a procedural process, and I read through all these letters where staff kept asking, please provide this information or please provide this evidence, and I'm hearing from legal counsel tonight for Ohio House that, well, we think it's an impossible standard to meet, so we're not going to even bother. So it's almost like they're if thrown in the towel, and they're going to go through this kind of go through this process of to exhaust their quote unquote administrative processes, and they really didn't participate in them to kind of gird for legal action, which I'm assuming this is probably where this is going to go. But there's plenty of other applications who have done that, who have provided the evidence, and some probably have been turned down, a lot have been turned down, and some have been accepted. So I just think to throw up our hands and say this is an impossible standard and we're not going to participate in the process or respond to staff requests for evidence is kind of odd to me. So, so I will support the motion, and absent any other comments, call for the question.
That motion carried 5-0.
Okay, and that decision can be appealed to the City Council. It will be final within 7 days unless it is appealed to the City Council. Thank you. We'll let the room settle down a little bit before we move on to the next. Okay, Julie, next item, thanks.
Public hearing item number 2. Development Review 1902, Planning Application 18-18, Minor Modification 19-02, and Zoning Application 19-12 for the construction of a new building to be used for storage for general contractor use in the Commercial Limited CL Zone located at 792 Center Street. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Commissioners, any communications to report? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Arias, please.
Good evening, Chair, Planning Commissioners, Justin Arias, Assistant Planner. As Julie described, the project involves the construction of a new one-story, 1,900 square foot building to accommodate a general contractor use. The request includes a development review for the construction of a new building in the Commercial Limited Zone, planning application for a conditional use permit for a general contractor use in the Commercial Limited Zone, minor modification for a reduction in the required front landscape setback, and zoning application for a minor conditional use permit to provide parking as garage spaces and to deviate from parking requirements due to unique operating characteristics. The project site is located in Westside Costa Mesa along Center Street between Placentia Avenue and Wallace Avenue. The property is zoned CL Commercial Limited and has a general plan land use designation of neighborhood commercial. The surrounding properties include a mix of residentially and commercially zoned properties and include residences to the east and south across Center Street and commercial uses to the north and to the west. Here are some site photos of the existing development. The site contains an approximately 400 square foot building, which is used as an office and is proposed to remain. The remainder of the site is a paved lot. Here's a proposed site plan and a conceptual landscape plan for the proposed project. The new buildings, which are shown in red, would be constructed of CMU block material with vinyl windows, a metal entry door, and metal roll-up garage doors. Roofing would match the existing building in roof slope, with the higher side oriented towards the commercial properties to the west. And the project also includes upgrades to the parking area, new landscaped areas, and other site improvements. According to the city's land use matrix, a general contractor use in the Commercial Limited Zone requires approval of a conditional use permit. The proposed use is an administrative office and construction storage facility for a general contractor use. Storage includes company vehicles, including a forklift and materials. All storage would be located indoors, and all loading and unloading activity would occur indoors as well. The proposed hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. The use would have one staff member on site with 5 out in the field during the day. The use is not open to the public and has no visits from customers. The project includes a request for a minor modification to reduce the required front landscape setback to 16 feet, where 20 feet is required by code. Staff believes the proposed wall with vertical landscaping meets the intent of the front landscape setback requirement and enhances the transition from the commercial properties along Placentia to the residential neighborhood along Center Street. In addition, the setback is also consistent with adjacent properties to the west. The project also includes a request for a minor conditional use permit to provide required parking as garage spaces and to deviate from parking requirements due to unique operating characteristics. Staff supports both requests related to parking because the proposed use would be for a storage for a general contracting use and would not be open to the public. In addition, garage spaces would be used for employee parking during the day and storage of company vehicles overnight. Staff's recommendation includes conditions of approval for the project related to the type of operation permitted, availability of parking spaces, and color and finish of the new structure. The proposed project is consistent with the general plan, zoning code, and other applicable development standards, and conditions of approval have been included to ensure the proposed use operates with minimal impacts on adjacent properties. Therefore, staff is recommending approval and finding that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per Section 15303, Class 3. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arias, for your presentation. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Commissioner Zick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know the answer to this question, but it's a predicate. Does the CUP run with the land?
Yes, that's correct.
Does a minor CUP run with the land as well?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Woods.
Okay, I have a lot of questions. Okay, let's see. Okay, on handwritten, page 3, you talk about the last paragraph. You talk about condition number 20 and that the vehicle gate. Can you explain that last paragraph?
Yes.
I mean, I could read it back to you, but can you explain how you determined condition number 20 and, parking at the 16-foot setback versus 20 feet and why the gate needs to remain open? How does that factor into all of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is a condition of approval from our transportation division, essentially giving the applicant an option of how they would like to propose their vehicle gate. So the request for the minor modification for the 16-foot landscape setback would allow the vehicle gate to be at that location. However, standard queuing distance that would be required for vehicle gates is 20 feet. And if if it were to be placed at the 16-foot setback, there wouldn't be sufficient distance to allow the queuing, to allow the gate to be opened and closed. So essentially, the applicant has the 3 options to either provide the vehicle gate at the 20-foot setback, which would allow for sufficient queuing distance, or the other 2 options would be to have the vehicle gate open during operating hours, or to have an automatic rolling gate so that it opens via a remote.
Okay, so then the vehicle gate, in lieu of having that queuing distance, they are required to have the vehicle gate open at all times.
That is one of the options,
hours.
yes. Or they can provide it as an automatic rolling gate, or they could provide the 20-foot setback.
Okay, okay. How many vehicles are proposed to be parked on site? I know there was a mention of a forklift. Those aren't very big. But how many company vehicles? Or I can save that one for the applicant.
That might be
okay, I'll
for the
save that one
applicant.
for the applicant. Okay, on handwritten page 4, there was a sentence there that made me a little bit uncomfortable. And it was, it's about the proposed, you're discussing the preliminary landscape plan and the request for a minor modification to reduce the required front landscape setback to 16 feet, 20 feet is required. And then the next sentence is the one that makes me uncomfortable. Staff believes the proposed wall with vertical landscaping meets the intent of the front landscape setback requirement and enhances the transition from the commercial properties on Placentia Avenue to the residential neighborhood along Central Street. And that word intent, tell me what you think the intent of front landscaping is for a commercial business.
So in general, the intent of the front landscape requirement is to require a softening effect via landscaping for the front edge of a property so that the transition between the street and in this case, a commercial use is something that is aesthetically pleasing and beneficial in general to the larger public. So that's the general intent.
Okay, so the reason and I don't disagree with that. I think that the intent of landscaping, one of the intents is that visual softening, just having some relief from a man-made structure to something kind of dynamic like a tree or a bush that changes in time and space. But I also think there's a really important function there as well, and that's where I get really uncomfortable, is that landscaping also provides the function of providing percolating space, and it also provides the important function of capturing surface runoff on a developed area. And so what makes me uncomfortable about that statement is if I were to accept that as true, then it would not, I bet next week we will get an application that says, well, I put artificial plants on this wall, and so that provides that aesthetic intent of the landscaping setback. I mean, and that certainly complies if we were to, it certainly complies with the intent as you define it, but I really think it should be broader. It has a specific function, percolation and capturing runoff. So I just wanted to point that out because that just sends things in a really weird direction. How much square footage of landscaping is lost by granting a minor modification to the landscape setback? I know that they want 16 feet instead of 20 feet, but how much total square footage would that reduction, how much square footage would be reduced in percolating landscape setback? But I can come back to that question if I want to keep rolling along. Okay. Does the current property as configured meet the landscaping requirement?
The existing development would not. It is mostly a paved lot in its existing condition.
Okay. Okay, so now let's go on to the parking. Why is the ADA space inside the garage? It's my understanding that an ADA spot, you need a certain number of ADA spots based on the square footage, and it usually that spot has to have the most direct access to the building that, it's going to. So it seems to me that being inside the garage isn't really the most direct access point. Why wasn't it located there? There's a space on the site plans, and I couldn't tell how wide it was, but there's a space between the gate and I want to say the first building? The first building? Page 30. Yeah. How come ADA can't be placed there? It seems to be that. Yeah, right, so there's a space between the gate and then the first 400 square foot office building, I think the one that's currently there. And so why couldn't you fit an ADA space there? Because it seems to me that would be the most sort of direct access point to the office area.
I believe that area was explored for parking. The issue became the required backup distance to allow vehicles to get out of that parking space that was not able to be provided in that location.
Is that because of the landscaping that's there?
Correct.
Had they considered perhaps just moving the landscaping over to be able to provide direct access for a disabled person?
I think you could ask the applicant.
Okay, so we'll put that one, applicant. Okay, and then can you explain the turnaround inside the garage? That's a little bit unique. And I was wondering if since it's being used as a turnaround space, would that also be required to remain open during business hours?
So that turnaround space would be specifically for that middle parking space along that back wall to allow that vehicle to do a K-turn to get out of the property. We did condition let me pull it up real quick, to have that turnaround area to be striped so that no parking would occur in that location.
Okay, but there's a garage there, so the turnaround space is inside the garage. And so that space it's like this space that can't really be used for anything, right? It has to always remain open as a turnaround space. The garage always has to remain open during business hours. It's just a turnaround space inside of a building. That's so unique. Okay. Maybe the applicant can expand on that. And then you also said that parking is based on retail. The parking requirement was based on based on retail parking requirements, but we just heard that this is not, this business is not open to the public. There'll be no like public business hours. And so why would you base it on retail? And was there something, is that just the most suitable for this type of use? Was there anything sort of more related that might have been a better match? Because to me, it doesn't seem like a good match.
So our retail, and it's also for office uses and commercial, is 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
Got it, okay. And then this one was in the findings, and it was handwritten page 6, and it talks about the general plan land use designation of the property is neighborhood commercial, and that's defined as neighborhood commercial is intended to serve convenience shopping and service needs of the local residents. And this area is, there's sort of high density housing in the area, a lot of renters, a lot of lower income folks that live in this area. And so how would I can see how the space meets the need of the property owner. What I'm having difficulty in understanding is how you justify it as this satisfying the neighborhood commercial. So how does this particular business owner satisfy the needs of those residents if most of them are renters, they're not homeowners looking to remodel, they're lower income families living in high density residential?
So the general plan land use designation for neighborhood commercial is a broad designation. A variety of commercial uses fit within that designation as identified in the zoning code. So although the uses intended for that area are largely sort of neighborhood serving, they're also intended to be sort of small offices. I think neighborhood commercial is really intended to refer to the intensity of the use as opposed to a direct serving commercial retail type use. This designation allows for all of those things.
But to me, that doesn't really fit. That still doesn't, here it very clearly says neighborhood commercial is convenience shopping and service needs of the residents. It doesn't really say anything about lower intensity or some of the things you just discussed.
So from the standpoint of staff and why we made the determination that we did, we look at a few different factors when we're looking at consistency with the general plan land use designation. One of them is just the general type of use that is proposed. The other is that with each general plan land use designation, there are also corresponding zoning districts that are identified that are compatible with that land use designation. And then lastly, we look at, is the use permitted or conditionally permitted by the zoning code? And by virtue of those 3 things together, our determination in this case is that it was a compatible use. Also, that played into that was just the larger definition of neighborhood commercial. We don't view neighborhood commercial as necessarily having to be resident serving, only that it be of the scale of a neighborhood commercial use. That's our read of the land use designation.
Okay, well, thank you for your interpretation of that.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions of staff before we open the public hearing? Vice Chair Harlan.
Just quickly, was there any consultation with the applicant regarding landscaping requirements prior to the imposition of the condition? I think it was condition number 7.
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
Okay, and then staff, I have one question on, it's in the conditions of approval on handwritten page 24. This is planning condition of approval number 3. All uses shall be conducted under roof. No outdoor storage shall be permitted unless the outdoor storage complies with the zoning code outlined in table 13-44 of the Costa Mesa Municipal Code. So I go to that table and it says outdoor storage is permitted when storage does not interfere with required parking or vehicular access. Storage is not in required setback area abutting a public right-of-way. So, is it your opinion that that particular element of the code, I don't know, it seems to me more that it is, it lends itself to allowing outdoor storage relatively easily. So I guess that's maybe more of a comment than a question. I'm just wondering if the outdoor storage condition, I'll have to think that over. It's not a question. Sorry about that.
I can provide a little information if it would
Okay.
help. The reason for that condition is if you look at the last row in table 13-44 refers to outdoor storage incidental to the main use, and the row right above that has the requirements for uses under roof. And uses are required to be under roof except as allowed by minor conditional use permit or as permitted elsewhere in the zoning code. So that condition was written in that way so that the minor conditional use permit process would be followed, or if the applicant proposes outdoor storage which meets the requirements elsewhere in the zoning code, then it may be permitted by right. But those are the two options that the code allows for.
Okay. And I may have missed it, but is there any contemplation by staff when, I mean, this is kind of unique to me being so close to residential. Is there any contemplation of staff how the operation of equipment that might produce emissions, where we either think about that or we require some kind of modification to the equipment so emissions are, brought to a level that we feel is appropriate or less than significant in any way? I just don't know, with a construction yard next to storage yard, and I'll ask this of the applicant, what kind of vehicles are going to be going out of there? Are going to be diesel burning vehicles? Or are they, that kind of thing? So I guess I'm wondering do you think about those things when we have a use like this that's going to be abutting residential?
We do consider those things when we look at land use compatibility considerations. The zoning code also has those considerations baked into it when it identifies permitted and conditionally permitted uses in this zoning district. I would say that from staff's perspective, the primary use here is for storage of those types of vehicles, not necessarily their active use during the daytime. We can have the applicant describe their operation in detail, but it's our understanding that that equipment is essentially stored on site. Their employees come on site, park their personal vehicles, and then take that equipment off site. So from that perspective, we did not have a concern for compatibility.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward, please. Yes, sir.
My name is John Hill. I'm the architect for the project.
And has your client read the conditions of approval, and do they agree with them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much for considering this application. Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Justin and Jennifer have done a great job at explaining what the intent was. We do certainly want to follow the rules, as we all know are important. A couple of the details that we can go through, Commissioner Woods, to address your comments. One is the gate. We originally wanted a 10-foot setback because up and down Center Street, most of the fences are actually right on the sidewalk or maybe only 2 or 3 feet back. So originally we thought 10 feet was very compatible given the fact that the neighboring houses had fences directly on the sidewalk or only a few feet back. But in talking with staff and trying to be compatible and being malleable, 16 feet was acceptable. As far as the 16-foot gate and the setback, having it open during operating hours or have an automatic gate similar to you'd see anywhere else, that addresses that queuing issue of the 20 foot. So I think that was a fair resolution. As far as the landscape goes, we have more square footage of landscape than is required by the code. It's just not all up front. We also have landscaping behind the fence. And so as far as percolation, we have more than what's required. And we wouldn't put in plastic fence or plastic plants or anything like that. The intent of the vertical nature is to soften that edge so you don't end up with just a solid masonry block wall. You have something that actually has texture. You have vertical planting that also softens that edge as well. As far as the ADA, we actually wanted to put the ADA up front, but in order to get the ADA up front, we needed the 10-foot setback. So when the city required the 20-foot, there was no room left. We'd have to tear down the old building that was there, and it's a sweet little building. It's the 400-square-foot building that's remaining. So keeping the character of Costa Mesa and the history of the existing building, the idea was to keep that building, and the only way to be able to put in an ADA stall would be either go with a 10-foot setback, which is what we originally requested, or to remove the building, which seemed to be counterproductive. As far as the turnabout, bear in mind this is a 50-foot wide by 150-foot deep property, so the only way to get into the site to actually turn around is to hammerhead, which is what we're proposing. The idea of the garage is to be able to utilize coverage and still keep it simple, because otherwise what we'd be doing is building two buildings and then doing a hammerhead in the middle, and that's just a waste of money and effort. So that's the reason why we proposed the hammerhead to be in the middle. It is striped. No storage, no vehicle will be placed in that area during operation or subsequent to. As far as the existing property, I don't know if you know, but originally it was just auto storage. I mean, if you saw the satellite photo that I downloaded from before Dean took over the property, it had, I have no idea, maybe 30, 40 vehicles that were just packed into the site. So I think in general, this is definitely a better use for the area. It is sensitive to the proximity of the neighbors. It's a better use. It's a local business, which we all need. I'm a local Costa Mesa business owner, so I know, small businesses are important, and I know Dean's business is likewise. As far as equipment, it's his satellite location. His primary business is in Monrovia. He has work all throughout the LA basin, so this is a secondary location for vehicles to come and be able to address fencing in a local area. So there's no fabrication that's going on in place. There's no heavy equipment that's being utilized throughout the day. If anything, it'll be relatively quiet. Given the fact that it backs right up to Wahoo's Fish Tacos and really kind of buffers between the neighbors and a restaurant, I think it is a good use. I'll concede the rest of the time for anybody who has any questions or any concerns that may be, but I remain available if you have questions.
Okay, commissioners, any questions of the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Zick.
So on the question of parking, I'm trying to understand the logistics of the employees show up in the morning, park their personal vehicles, and then they go out to the field with the company vehicles to do their job.
Well, in part, but part of it is that some of the vehicles are brought by the employees that actually drive them home. So not all the vehicles are necessarily stored. There is some stuff that might be stored, whether it be material for various different, maybe it's tools and so forth, or they may have to load something to be able to be put in a vehicle to go take care of a service call. But some vehicles are actually brought the very morning. So not all of it is a trade of employee personal vehicles for commercial vehicles. Some of them, just like cops take their cars home sometimes, it's a similar situation.
So is it the expectation when the employees show up for work, those that show up with their personal vehicles, that they would park those personal vehicles within the boundaries?
Absolutely. No one's parking on the street. Everything is parked on property. We are not utilizing any street parking.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner Woods.
How many vehicles do you plan, like company vehicles, will be on site, say, on the weekends?
Well, on the weekends, I mean, anywhere from probably 2 to 4. I mean, it varies. Like a lot of the equipment will probably be at the other location because that's where primarily a lot of the fencing product comes from and the materials that they go through. So like I say, not a lot of is really stored in this location. Most of it's at the other location. But again, this is for satellite locations, so they don't lose a lot of time going south to cover other territories that they're trying to cover, like in Costa Mesa, Newport, and whatnot.
Got it. And what kind of materials will be stored on site?
It's a vinyl fencing. Primarily, it's plastics, but it's not. And they use the vinyl fencing because it's durable with the UV inhibitors. It lasts longer than wood breaks down and metal rust, but but the vinyl fencing is very durable, and it looks good too.
Okay, and then is there any other, I don't know a lot about vinyl fencing, but any other like chemicals or anything that would be stored on site?
No, there are no hazards relating to any chemicals. Everything is environmentally sensitive. You see these fences go up a lot of places. Matter of fact, in many cases, we've been putting them at hotels in Irvine because they offer a nice screening. We just did it at the old Hyatt that's right there at Jamboree and 405. The green fencing you see there is a vinyl fence. It looks like it's wood, but it's vinyl. And you also see it at the Lennar properties and so forth as well. So it's durable and it's environmentally sensitive.
Okay, and I understand why you would want that turnaround spot, how it would be less costly to create just one building with an open garage than to create two just for the little turnaround spot. But did you consider any other configurations, like instead of using that turnaround spot as a turnaround space, but actually using it as parking space and maybe eliminating one from the outside?
We did, but the only way you can really turn around is to be able to hammerhead into that northern edge of the property. And the other thing too, in regards to the handicap, the location of it, like I say, originally we wanted the handicap right up front, but there wasn't space for it. So the next closest was where we are locating the handicap. That is the closest stall to the office. So as you get out of a car and you go to the office, that is the closest proximity to have an access, and also being covered during inclement weather when it's raining. The handicap stall is the one that gets the coverage. So it's also required by ADA that if you're going to have any covered parking, which of course we have 3, if you have any handicap stalls, they need to be covered opposed to uncovered. So we also, if we're going to have parking inside the garage, we had to put a handicap stall to cover ADA requirements.
Okay, and so I noticed in the site plans you had a little office area next to the restrooms. That's the main office, it's not the 400 square foot
No,
building?
the 400 square foot is the office, but that's also an additional little management office, so to speak, for paperwork and so forth. But we didn't have enough space for the handicap restroom inside the 400 square foot building, so we needed to provide a handicap restroom in that building, which is also part of the ADA requirements. But then right next to that, rather than just make it storage, we went ahead and put it for some files and paperwork and whatnot.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Harlan.
Thank you. Based on my question to staff, regarding landscaping, I'm assuming that the plan that we have in our packet is just a placeholder?
No, as far as irrigation and planting material, that will be submitted separately, but as far as quantities and locations, yeah, that is what's proposed.
Okay, because the code, it was planning condition of approval number 7 requires 3 trees, which are not evident on the plan yet, as well as compliance with our water efficient landscape guidelines, which I also suspect may not necessarily allow some of the plant material here.
That would actually fall under our landscape application permit. We would be following the city requirements for that application. So the absence of the 2 additional trees and the absence of drought tolerance was not intended to oversight or sidestep that. That would just be simply filed under the landscape application we had filed, but we have no problem with making that a condition of the approval.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Commissioner Colbert, do you have any questions of the applicant? Okay, thank you, sir. I'll open the public comment now, portion of the public hearing, and ask members of the public to come forward to speak on this item. Sir, Commissioner McCarthy.
Good to see everybody. Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners. Colin McCarthy, longtime Costa Mesa resident and former planning commissioner. Thank you for your service. I appreciate all that you do. I love the questions tonight, especially Commissioner Wood's questions on the landscaping and probing those issues. Taking a step back for a minute, Dean Smith is here with his family. I don't know if you know Dean. A lot of people know Dean, known Dean for years. His kids go to Victoria School. He volunteers a lot in this community. He coaches not 1, but 2 baseball teams. If you've ever coached youth sports before, you know that that is not 1, but 2 part-time jobs on top of his full-time job. Why is that germane to the discussion tonight? Because in my view, when I used to look at these kinds of applications, it goes to the veracity of the applicant. I want to know what am I going to get 1, 2, 3 years down the road after the application has hopefully been approved. As a Costa Mesa resident who chooses to have his business in Costa Mesa on the west side, on Monrovia, expanding his storage into this space, It warms my heart to know that people are choosing not only to live in Costa Mesa, but to have their businesses here. As far as the landscape question was the first thing that popped out in my mind when I saw the application. If you drive that area, this is a fundamental increase in the landscape, the green, the percolating water, the environmental component to that area, which is heavy pavement. So I'm ecstatic that John Hill and his team were able to come up with something that adhered to the spirit and design of that. But I stand behind, as a resident, the application, the applicant. I know he's a strong businessman. Showtime Vinyl is everywhere in this city. You see vinyl fences, it's likely Showtime. So they're committed to the city, and Dean's committed to the city in a lot of different ways. He's worked hard. Justin has been working on this, I know, for I think a year. Trying to make the little pieces move and make everything fall into place so that would benefit the community and would benefit the applicant and make sure that we're ultimately going to get a good product. So thank you for your good questions. Hopefully you'll support the application tonight and support Dean and his continued business in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Michelle Figueredo Wilson. I'd like to say welcome to our neighborhood. I live directly across the street in the new construction and across from Wahoo, so they are my neighbor. I can see their property from my window. I am here to express the support of 9 families on our street. To explain a little bit why we support this is because for me it's been about 4 years, but for the other families it's been more than 10 years that the previous business was nothing but a blight on their block. With all of the cars and the environmental issues. Before my property was built, the previous owner used to come and store his cars, and he would do mechanic work. So it was a mess. He would take up parking spaces. There wasn't good lighting. So some of those vehicles would sit for days, even getting ticketed sometimes from the street sweeper. And with all the homeless issues prior to our homeless shelter being addressed now, people would come and look in the cars. They would be vandalized. So it did bring a lot of criminal elements to our neighborhood. So as a realtor, I would love to see this property being used at its highest and best. And I think contextually now where we're at today with the shelter opening up down on Anaheim, the way that you have proposed this is going to be a tremendous improvement in our neighborhood. Just the only thing I would please ask is a lot of green, a lot of flowers. I like the idea about having the gate closed, if you guys could work together with staff on that. But the hours of operation and the fact that there's no consumer activity coming in and out is going to transform what that little area used to be. So I know you don't know me or any of our neighbors, but please also let your client know that he has a lot of support with the way that you've made this design. So thank you very much, and I really hope that you guys can work together to work out some of those kinks with the parking and the setback. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. I basically support this project. I have no doubt that the current owner of the project and the business that's planning to go in there is going to use it exactly the way they say they're going to use it, and that the reduction in parking is appropriate for that kind of business on that site and everything. I see only a couple of things that concern me, and that is there's nothing in the condition of use that should he decide to sell the property, because you've got a condition for the first CUP and you've got conditions for other processes, but you don't have anything for the minor conditional finding on the parking change. And I'm wondering if he, in good business choice somewhere down the line, decides to sell his property, and somebody else comes in who is not that same person, who is not looking at it the same way. Maybe he looks at that storage building as he can do other stuff, like have more staff, have a bigger staff order, and that will change. And I'm just concerned that I don't see anything that breaks that, and I don't know if the minor use immediately dies upon the sale of the property. That's the only thing I don't know. Other than that, as I said, I support the process. I think he's going to do exactly what he needs to do, and it's going to bring good stuff to the west side. So that's a good thing.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Hello. I actually live on the west side. And in fact, the Smiths may be our neighbors, but so I don't doubt that the proposed project is going to be an enhancement for that area. This is my concern with the project. And I think it kind of really started with Mr. Sitch when he brought up the fact that Costa Mesa has been giving out a lot of variances with the Fort project, which I wish you guys had voted against because it was just a matter of greed giving all those variances. I walked and knocked on almost every door in District 5 and District 4. And one of the things that the residents are concerned with is the city giving away variances for nothing. What difference does it make? Why do they need the variances to do this project? They're not needed. It's just making it bigger. And I do think that it's not compatible with the city council that was elected to be giving out these variances. And I really think that, because I know a lot of residents who have had to take their patios down or haven't been given permission to violate the requirements for the building codes, they're not giving to residents, but they are given to businesses. So I am really, really concerned about the fact that you guys are just giving variances for no good, legitimate reason, and they're happening on the west side, and they need to stop. Thank you. Because we were talking about rules, right? Following the rules? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, good evening.
Hi, my name is Lene Smith, and my husband is Dean. We're the property owners at 792 Center Street, and I just wanted to say that we do live in the west side as well. We love Costa Mesa. We support the community, and our business sponsors several of the local community. We support Victoria Elementary School. We donate at Estancia Sports, Costa Mesa National Little League. He's been working, I think, as they said, for over a year to try to get the permits completed so that the business can work. That's the only reason we're asking for these variances, because we couldn't make it work any other way. So we're just asking, please, to approve the permits so that he can keep his business in Costa Mesa. We love this community and want to stay in this city and be an active part. So I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no further comment, I'll bring the item back up to the dais. For anyone have any additional questions of staff before I close the public hearing? Commissioner Woods.
I wanted to loop back to my original question about square footage and landscaping.
Yes, so if you were to take out the driveway and the ADA path of travel, you'd be losing or would be missing out on 116 square feet of landscaping.
Okay. And then my second question is, we heard from the applicant about why the variance is needed, but there wasn't too much, at least I don't recall. It's been a long week. Why does staff think that, what's a strong reason for why a variance is required for this property? And why couldn't they make it work otherwise?
The applicant might be able to explain why they couldn't make it work. But
Right, I'm going to let the applicant head up the details there, but I just wanted to clarify the request this evening. I know variance means something very specific to planners. In this particular case, the request is not for a variance, it's a minor modification, which is a much lower bar.
Okay.
The findings are essentially, is it detrimental to the community to grant a minor modification?
Okay.
Just to clarify, the required landscape is 150 square feet on the property, and we have 158 square feet, so we are over in square footage. As far as the existing condition, I mean, aside from the fact that the original property was basically auto storage, currently the entire front area is concrete poured with just parking. Right. So if the applicant were to keep the existing use and not provide these upgrades, the entire front would be a parking lot. So this is an improvement. And the purpose of whether it be variances or minor modifications, I think, is at the discretion, of course, the city, yourselves, to make sure that something better, because not everything can be written black and white in a rule. And there are times in which we realize there's something better at hand, but if the limitations of a written rule, forgoes that, then this is the opportunity for the city to have something that's better, which I think it's pretty clear this is, so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had a concern about parking and was initially satisfied by the condition of approval number 1 on page 24 that led me to believe that if this owner sold the business to somebody else that did not operate the same type of business, which is storage for general contractor, a business that would have no more than 6 employees, et cetera, then the condition of approval related to this parking would not continue to be valid. However, because of the comment that Mr. Humphrey made, I looked closer at the heading for that set of 3 conditions, and it says that it's related to the conditional use permit, not the minor conditional use permit, and that is the one that is granting the variance for the parking. So what I'm wondering is, and this is a long way to get to my question, is whether the heading of those 3 conditions should be modified to also reference the minor conditional use permit, or if the language of that first condition should be replicated down below, like 4B or 4A, so it's very clearly related to the minor conditional use permit. That's a bad question, but if you could kind of sort through that.
Ms. Lee.
I think I understood what you intended. I'll tell you staff's perspective on why we structured it this way. We're fine actually adding a condition of approval that clarifies that the intent was that, if the type of use that we're describing here goes away, then the parking related minor conditional use permit would also go away. We're fine tying those 2 things together. In our minds, they were tacitly tied together in any case, because the basis for the minor conditional use permit is special or unique operating characteristics. And in this case, those unique operating characteristics are the fact that the use is for storage of vehicles in the way described in condition of approval number 1. So for us, they were tied together, but I think it's fine to clarify that if you think it would be more clear.
Not that people would necessarily agree with me. We're not there yet. What would your recommendation be for modifying this to satisfy what you understand my intent to be?
My suggestion would be to augment condition of approval number 4 to refer back to condition of approval number 1 under the CUP. I think that's an effective way to do it. I would also ask for our city's attorney's office to weigh in if they felt that there was a better way to do it. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, commissioners, any additional questions of staff before I close the public hearing? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the dais and ask for any comments or motions. Okay, so I will move that the Planning Commission find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act per CEQA Guidelines Section 15303 Class 3 for new construction, and approve the proposed project development review 1902, planning application 1818, minor modification 19-02, and zoning application 19-12. Subject to the conditions of approval with the following modification, that under the condition of approval On handwritten page 24, relative to ZA 19-12, condition of approval related to the minor conditional use permit, that the deviation for parking is no longer applicable if the use changes from that described in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Okay, any comments? Vice Chair Harlan.
Sure, I'll start. So I generally agree this project appears to be a vast improvement over what is existing. And I do want to support this motion. Where I do have some minor reservations is in the landscaping. And my reason for that is twofold. One is that we're looking for a deviation from the requirement. So we're being asked to modify this. And my opinion is that if we're going to request or at least grant the reduced setback, then the public should benefit in some way from some enhanced landscaping. My second reason is I think that the west side, as has been pointed out, hasn't necessarily seen the best of landscaping. And so if we're essentially operating with a blank slate here, I think quality is more important than quantity. What I see in the proposed plan is, I can best describe it as unimaginative. Creeping fig, Boston fern, birds of paradise. I think Commissioner Woods, you'd agree with me, that's an old landscaping palette. And doesn't really provide much in the way of ecological functionality. And while that might not seem all that important, I do think that this is going to be an improvement in the area. And I'm not really persuaded by this idea that just because it's an improvement, it's going to be vastly better. I think that this area deserves a good landscaping plan. So I'm hopeful that condition of approval 7 gives a little bit more teeth and guidance into what should ultimately be there. I'm not clear if we actually have a landscaping palette or planting plan that the applicant can select from, but this seems to be a bit antiquated.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Zick.
So I don't completely disagree with my fellow commissioner. I'm not entirely sure I understand the concern well enough to translate that into an improved requirement. So are those comments leading to the hope that the eventual landscaping is going to be better than what's described, or are you thinking of attempting to firm up the requirements?
Well, those are my observations. I'm hoping that there's some concurrence or at least some understanding of what I'm requesting here. And if you want to support that, I welcome that. I'm not inclined to direct the applicant to include a specific plant palette because we haven't done that previously. But generally, we've had applicants who, recognizing the need for improvement in landscaping, are very willing. They voluntarily say, okay, we can work with the city in coming up with something that's a little bit more, it's just a better functioning landscape, not simply something that looks purely ornamental.
Okay, so I would just suggest that we have a very attentive staff. They've taken Vice Chair Harlan's remarks under advisement and a very responsible, I think, property owner and applicant. So I think it'll be okay. All right. Commissioner Woods.
Okay, so the concern that I have with this neighborhood in particular, not so much the applicant. Thank you for your presentation. I understand where you're coming from. I understand the need, and I agree with you. It's an improvement over the parking lot that's currently there. So this neighborhood, looping back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, has a Cal and Buyer screen score of 80 to 85%. Means that it is burdened by, its pollution burden is 80 to 85% higher than every other community in California. Every other one, statewide, Northern California, Southern California. This community is worse off than 85% of all those communities. It's pollution burden. It's due to toxic releases from industries that are located along Placentia Avenue. The traffic density is high. There's a high number of cleanup sites. In fact, it scores a 98%, meaning that it has more cleanup sites than 98% of all the other communities in California. And so when I read that, it makes me particularly sensitive to the types of land uses that we're going to approve or disapprove in these areas, because we have a real opportunity to change that EnviroScreen score. And I think what's the pros of this application is, one, it's just 6 cars or 6 employees and a few company vehicles. There won't be any toxic releases, although the vinyl is a lot of PVC, and there may be, right? There won't be an increase in traffic density, and it's certainly not going to end up as a cleanup site, because that vinyl fencing can just be moved when the property owner moves. The problem I have is really the general plan land use designation for the property, and it very clearly states that it should be neighborhood commercial, meaning it would serve the convenience shopping and serve convenience shopping and provide service needs for the residents. And it doesn't do that. And that's what's missing from the west side, right? There's a lot of high-density housing. There's plenty of liquor stores. There's one supermarket, I think, in this area. And so by approving this particular application doesn't fulfill that general land use designation. It doesn't make it any better for the residents. It's a win-win for the property owner, who's going to run their business there, because they'll have a safe, secure place for them to operate their business, but it really doesn't do anything to improve the lives of these residents. And I'm certainly not implying that it's up to business owners to improve the lives of residents. That's just bananas. But I think that an argument can be made that we can be very mindful of the type of land uses that we're going to approve or disapprove, keeping in mind that we have a really overburdened community right here. And so I'm honestly on the fence. I don't know if I'm going to support the motion or not support the motion. Part of me thinks that I shouldn't, because if I'm going to be very clear about improving the EnviroScreen score of an overburdened neighborhood, then we should be very thoughtful about what kind of land uses we're going to permit there. On the other hand, the proposed land use wouldn't necessarily raise that score, because it's has a very sort of limited use. I concur with Commissioner Harlan about the landscaping. You guys can definitely do a lot better there. I don't think that an ivy-covered wall it makes it a little bit nicer, but at the end of the day, it's just an ivy-covered wall, and only rodents like to live there. And that's all the comments that I have for now.
Okay, anyway, Commissioner Zick, I see you punching the button.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll be supporting the motion. I'm not as up to speed on this EnviroScreen score as my colleague, and I think it's something that I'll be attempting to do. But relative to the nature of this business, I don't see it as one that is overly burdensome in that area. It's not like an industrial manufacturing or automotive repair or anything like that. So I'm less concerned about this use making that condition worse. The issue of the neighborhood commercial, I guess what I think about with that one, and it reminds me of some of the complaints that residents had about the way some of the development on the Harbor Boulevard up near the freeway occurred a number of years ago. People didn't like the kind of restaurants that were going in there, and they were trying to pressure some of the city council members at that time, why let that kind of place go there? And I remember one of the commissioners or council members commenting that their job isn't to build restaurants. So if a businessman, entrepreneur comes forward and says, this is what I want to do with a piece of land, and it's a entitled use for the land, then that's all you really have control over. You know, would I rather see something else on this land than Showtime Fence? I don't know, I hadn't really thought about it. But Showtime Fence is the one who's come forward and says, I want to make use of this piece of land for my business. And so I give that a lot of weight. I don't see the variances that they're asking for, and they're not variances, but the minor conditional use and the minor modification. Underparked projects is a pet peeve of mine, but I feel like we're adequately protected with the conditions of approval on this project, and this applicant is very specific about what their parking needs are, and I take the applicant's explanation as to how the employees and the business vehicles will be parked on site as a sincere response. So again, I'm not really concerned about that. I'm familiar with this business. I think they're a good business, but that isn't why I'm supporting this motion. We're not up here to pick winners and losers. That's a popular phrase in the news lately. You are a good business. You are involved in the community, and that's all great. And the only way I consider that information is if I feel like there's a tie. And although we're missing a really good basketball game, I'm assuming, but since you're a baseball coach, the tie goes to the runner. And that's why I'm supporting this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Zick. If there are not any more comments, I will call for the question.
That motion carried 4-1 with Commissioner Navarro Woods voting no.
Okay, thank you, and that will be final in 7 days unless appealed to the City Council. Thank you. Who needs a break? Anybody? None? Okay, we'll let the room clear out and then tackle our last public hearing. Are you guys okay? Do you need a little break? Okay, just checking. Okay, Julie, public hearing number 3, please.
Public hearing item number 3, planning application 18-43 for the construction of a below-grade parking structure for an existing automotive dealership and for retail building at 2665 Harbor Boulevard and 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East, respectively. This is a call to report any ex parte communications.
Commissioners, any communications to report? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. The application before you this evening is a proposal to construct a 10,244 square foot below grade parking structure for an existing automotive dealership, Nash Auto. This proposed structure would be used, would have a dual purpose. One, it would provide storage of surplus motor vehicle inventory for the dealership, but it would also provide code-required parking for an existing multi-tenant retail building located adjacent to this property at 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East. This zoning and vicinity map shows the location of the two properties respective to one another. Both properties are Zone C1, have a general plan designation of general commercial, and with the exception of the Azulon senior apartments across the street, the surrounding properties also have the C1 zone and general plan land use designation. This is a photograph of the Nash Auto site, taken at different angles, showing the vehicle inventory. Their primary inventory is pre-owned Lexus vehicles. And this is the abutting property, the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East building. It's a multi-tenant retail building. It was built in the 1960s. The majority of the parking spaces are to the rear of this building, which you see actually in the far right-hand slide. So this is looking at the 1505 property on the Nash Auto side. And then these photographs are showing the 1505 property looking towards Nash Auto. So the Nash Auto dealership was actually approved by the Planning Commission back in 2003. And in conjunction with the conditional use permit for the auto dealership, it also did include a variance from landscape setback requirements. As I mentioned, the multi-tenant retail building was built in the 1960s and has no prior discretionary planning application approvals on file. So this slide shows the existing condition. The light orange is the Nash Auto dealership, the 2665 Harbor. The light green is the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property. This slide shows the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property. As you can see, as the photos indicated, the majority of the parking spaces are at the rear of the building. And what you see in the below slide is kind of the after the project is built. So what you're seeing, the light orange shaded area is going to be the new parking area, below grade parking area for the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property. And the light green area is going to be the vehicle storage area for Nash Auto. The access to the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property will be a new ramp that's going down to the structure. And basically there will be a gate between the 1505 parking area and the Nash Auto storage area. Only employees would have access to the green area for Nash Auto. The orange area would be accessible to any customers and employees of the shopping center property. In addition to the proposed conditional use permit for the expansion of the dealership, the structure necessitates the relocation of the lot line, and that's to accommodate the structure at the surface. The other kind of side effect or side benefit is that there's an existing Edison easement and utility poles that traverse the two properties. The poles and overhead lines would be removed and relocated to a new on-site transformer. And other site improvements will include some facade renovations to the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property. As I indicated, the property was built in the 1960s. And the applicant is proposing some exterior facade enhancements, some additional veneer details. Additionally, staff incorporated a condition of approval requiring that the existing building signage be redesigned so it's consistent across all of the different uses on the property. And going back to the uses on the property, the new parking configuration will enable the site to provide actually one parking space in excess of the code-required parking spaces for the site. Unfortunately, because of the existing angled spaces at the front of the building, there was not an opportunity to provide any landscape enhancements or landscape improvements at the front of the property. So the applicant currently leases a lot directly across the street from this, where he's currently storing his overflow parking spaces, or I'm sorry, overflow vehicles for sale. The way that it currently works is that access to Nash Auto, because Harbor Boulevard has a raised median, basically vehicles exiting out to the right to Harbor Boulevard make a U-turn on Mesa Verde Drive East and then pull into the Nash Auto lot. And that's the existing circulation as it exists today. On the other hand, if vehicle inventory was being moved off-site to the temporary vehicle storage area, that would necessitate making a right turn out of the site a U-turn at Merrimack Way and then pulling into the property across the street. So the way that the applicant is proposing the parking structure, there is only one access in and out, and that's from the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property. And so basically vehicles being moved from the parking structure up to the top would basically be making right turns onto Harbor Boulevard onto the site. Subsequently, to move vehicles back over into the storage area would also necessitate having to make a right turn onto Harbor Boulevard, a U-turn at Merrimack, and then 2 rights into the proposed Nash Auto storage area. Staff notes that if the Planning Commission is not comfortable with having vehicles circulate on the site, there is also Commission has the option of requiring that an additional access ramp be provided on the Nash Auto property that feeds directly into the below-grade storage area. And that way, all of the on-site circulation would take place on-site and not go out onto the streets, even though that's basically what the practice is at the moment. So in the final end result of the entire project will include the following. Nash Auto will have an expanded vehicle display area, both above and below grade. The overhead utility lines and poles currently bisecting the sites will be removed. The 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property will have new below-grade parking area with 43 code-compliant parking spaces, and the 1505 Mesa Verde Drive East property will have an upgraded building facade and signage along the front of the property. As a result, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution that's included in your packets this evening, finding that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of CEQA, and approve Planning Application 1843, subject to the recommended conditions of approval. Staff did receive one correspondence indicating concerns with pedestrian circulation in the area, but our transportation engineer can respond to any questions related to that. And the applicant, who is actually the business owner of the property, is here and is able to respond to any questions, and also is going to make a brief presentation on their behalf.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Commissioner Zick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did the commercial tenants to the west of this project get noticed? I'm assuming they did.
Yes, property owners and occupants all received a notice.
Okay. And it would have been clear from them, well, let me ask, would it have been clear to them simply from the notice that there would be excavation immediately adjacent to their property to construct this underground parking?
Actually, I did speak to the owner of the nail salon at the very end of that building, and he did have specific questions as far as how the logistics of that would work. So I think I was able to answer his questions. But yeah, as far as the notice, it makes no mention that basically there's going to be excavation work during the construction of this project.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking of the businesses further west. The liquor store, the restaurant?
No, I didn't receive any correspondence from any of those tenants.
Okay. And second, this is simply an amendment to a previously approved conditional use permit, but the previously approved conditional use permit had nothing at all about a parking structure, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So amend doesn't mean minor. It just means we're changing it.
Yes.
Okay. And then you suggested that the Planning Commission could, as a possibility, suggest or recommend, forget your words, an additional ramp on the Nash property to provide access to their auto storage and obviate the need for the on-street circulation. I'm a little reluctant to try to design a project, especially one of that complexity, from the dais. So could you elaborate on any dialogue you had with the applicant regarding that option during the, I'll call it the conceptual design and application of the project?
Actually, the suggestion was a last-minute suggestion. I made the applicant aware of it this afternoon, as a matter of fact, so I'm sure they haven't had an opportunity to flesh out any design solutions at this point.
Okay. And then my last question, if instead of going underground to create the additional level of parking, would zoning allow for a two-story or an elevated level of parking behind the commercial strip?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Commissioner Woods.
I have a quickie. So the applicant has an approved CUP for the construction of the auto dealership, and in it, there's a variance for the front landscape setback requirement to go from 20 feet to 15 feet. And this is kind of a tangential question. So why in this situation is it a variance, but in the previous application, it's a minor modification? What's the difference?
The code identifies specified maximums that are allowed at each level. So for example, minor modification is limited for landscape setback purposes to a 20% deviation, which is why you saw minor modification for a 4-foot landscape reduction for a 20-foot required setback. There's also one step above that, which is an administrative adjustment, and then one step above that is a variance. So it really just is a matter of how much of a reduction the applicant is requesting as to which category these requests fall into.
Got it. So because this was 5 feet versus 4 feet, that makes a difference between the thresholds that you decide which category it goes into. Okay.
Okay. I will open the public hearing and ask the applicant to come forward, please. Yes, sir. Good evening. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody being here and looking at our application. We appreciate it. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I think that's a good way so we kind of get familiar with who I am. We acquired land of Nash Auto currently in 2001, I believe, and we finished the project by 2003. It's been a successful operation since we had it. Operation is strictly sales. We do not do any repairs or any, we don't have a service department basically. This location is just basically sales. And by the end of 2009, operation was growing and we needed an extra space to have the overflow cars to be stored there. So we had an opportunity. We were able to get the lease from a land across the street from us. It was vacant land. We ended up taking that land and we did a tremendous improvement on it. I wish I brought some picture from what it was to what we brought it into, and marble floors. We made the place really good. And we ended up using that just as a place to overflow car. I'd like to actually explain that the storage place is just a place that we keep the cars, that basically when we sell cars in our current lot, we transfer those cars from the storage to our current lot. It's actually only one-way traffic. It's not actually two-way traffic. So I know I mentioned, I just noticing when Mel was talking about this, he was explaining the operation between how cars kind of circulate between Nash Auto and the storage and going back from that. It actually doesn't work like that. It's best that I'm glad I'm here so I can explain it. The cars comes ready. Everything, we outsource everything. So the cars comes pretty much ready. You go to our dealership, to Lexus dealership, to do full inspection on it and all that stuff. And everything gets done before the cars comes here. And then when the car comes in, it goes into the storage. And the cars that we're actually selling are going to be in the top floor and for an easy access and for display and all of that. And once the cars are, if we sell 1 or 2 cars, we're a small operation. We're not selling 300 cars a month or 200 cars. We sell between probably like 25 to 40 cars a month. I love doing what I'm doing because it's fun, and I started when I was a kid, 17 years old, just buying cars and sitting in front of my house, and I cannot actually believe that I'm actually standing in front of you right now and proposing something that I wanted to, what I'm at right now. So this is American dream, and that's what we're here for, and I love this country, and I love the city of Costa Mesa. I think I've been very successful. I think I contribute to the city of Costa Mesa in so many different ways. And then when we actually acquired that place in 2009, we had a 10-year lease on it, which is the 10-year lease ending by the end of October. I literally started thinking about the project since closer to the end of 2017 because I know everything takes time. I never, not in my wildest dream, thought I'll be in 2019, and then we're in April and I'm still talking about this. It's been a lot longer process than I thought it would ever be. We did try to come up with different solutions to how to make this the best possible way. I tried to renew my lease across the street. They were not doing it. We're basically done. By the end of October, we have to be out there. So I don't have a other solution to basically have my car stored. When we came up with the design, we thought of everything. We can only understand going under is cost about probably 2 to 2.5 times than going above. And the reason of that, if you ever seen my business, I'm a perfectionist, and I like to have everything looks good and clean. And I thought by doing that, I will not have any kind of, eye pollution for the place. I want it to be everything underneath and clean. Even underneath, I'm gonna make it really nice and clean. And that's just who I am. That's my personality. You can look at my building and see how I am. So when we decided to come with this, we came up with so many designs, and the best design that we came up with, it's our operation. When we knew that we're losing the place across the street, we had to come up with a different solution. So we ended up acquiring the land behind us, which is 1505. And that's a pretty old building, very old building, as Mel said. It was built in 1960. It needs a lot of improvement, make it look good, and we're adding that to all of the operation. Originally, when we acquired this land, the first plan is that basically we're gonna give these people their notice, and they're gonna leave, and we're just gonna have that place open all as one lot for Nash Auto. And it would have been, trust me, it would have been the easier way to go. When I get to know those people that they're own their businesses for over 30 years, and they came to me, they're almost like, it really broke my heart. I could not move forward with just having them out. That's when I start thinking in 2017 how I could make this different, that I could make these people still own their businesses and not push them out of it, and just do something that it could work both ways for everybody. Their parking situation in the back is kind of tight, and they always have a complaint about it. It's not confirming as we speak. Our proposal to do that, one of the benefit of it, that it will be confirming after we're finished with that. We're gonna add approximately close to 20 more parking. That's all access to these people. We're not adding any traffic, in my opinion, because I think the current situation that we're in right now, it has more traffic than what will actually happen. When we sell the cars, we sell about, like I said, about 25 to 40 cars a month. The cars, when it gets sold, so most of the cars that we sell, I'll say about 95% of the cars we actually sell are on our website. They're the cars that are going to be on top. Underneath is going to be only the cars that basically for the overfill. So when the cars get sold, we'll bring the car just as one time. I'll be surprised if we have more than 2 to 3 cars max probably moved per day to just bring them from the parking lot to Nash Auto. And that would be actually happening by our lot guys, and I have 2 lot guys. These are the only 2 people that are gonna have an access to this parking lot to go in, take the cars, just make a right turn on Mesa Verde, right turn on Harbor Boulevard, going into Nash Auto. There is no going to be any more, we're not adding any traffic. There is no cars need to go from Nash Auto to the storage. That's not going to happen. As we speak right now, when Mel was representing this, I just wanted to clear that up, that it's not going to be circulating cars back and forth. We're a very small operation. The whole entire thing will, when we sell 40 cars, you can only imagine, we'll probably move like 4 cars, 5 cars. Literally, sometimes there is a week goes by and we don't sell cars, and we have not even one car moved in any direction, left or right. Everything is still until we sell a car. So the operation is very minimal, and it's very pristine. We like to keep everything nice and clean and pristine to accommodate that. Having a ramp going into, Mel called me today and he told me about the ramp if they suggested that's possible. I think that will actually defeat the purpose of having the whole operation. We're actually adding about 39 parking to National Auto that we're going to be used as a storage. And if we try to create any kind of ramp going down, we'll basically take about 15 to 20 parking spots. It will not be sensible, I guess that's the right word. Wouldn't make any sense to us at all, even cost-wise, business-wise, and I'm not gonna be able to get the amount of cars that I'm currently would like to have as a spot. Especially there is no actually transition between National Auto to the storage, it's the other way around. So we're gonna also do an improvement, so we're adding about 20 some parking to the current people that they have the businesses on 1505 Mesa Verde. We're making it better. We've been in business for a long time, and our lease is ending in the end of October. I am very stressed out over the whole operation, and once I lose that lease, it's going to be very difficult for us. I also, furthermore, I provided the place next door to us, which is currently known as to be as a car rental place. That's going to be completely empty for all the guests who are going to be going during the construction, as Mel mentioned. That will be there for them so they can park there right next to 7-Eleven. It's our property too, so we're going to leave that empty. We thought of everything. I thought I did, I guess. It's been a long process for me. It might not. It's just the logistic of everything and how everything works and the moving between the cars and all that. I think this is going to improve my operation, my business. I think I'm being a good I lived in Costa Mesa for years. I came into Costa Mesa in 1991. I've been here since. I love the city. I like to contribute. I think I'm contributing to the city quite a bit every month. As you know, sales tax and all the income that I'm generating to the city. And I think I deserve some kind of help so I can get this done. Otherwise, my operation would get disturbed dramatically if that did not happen, and it happened soon. Time is becoming a factor. I understand that's not your problem, but I'm just saying that's what has been happening. And I'm here, happy to answer any of your questions. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. If any of the resident or anybody will have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioners, any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Zick? Go ahead.
Thank you. I have one question, and it relates to how vehicles. By the way, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciated your information and the way you presented it, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
My question is about how you bring vehicles to your facility. Are they delivered via a semi-truck, like a big vehicle carrier?
No, sir. The cars goes straight from the places that. Everything is becoming digital right now, and this life is, I don't know how it's going to be, I don't know, 10 years from now, how the business is going to be, but everything is digital right now. We buy our even cars, we don't even go to auctions anymore. Everything is in the computer right now. So the cars get purchased, our transportation take them straight to the dealership, Lexus dealership, Westminster or Tustin, whoever have a space, get the cars there, and they have their own place there. Cars get there. We don't buy a lot of cars. It's, as you imagine, 40 cars a month, it means about 40 cars, 25 cars to 40 cars. It's about, an average about 7 cars to 8 cars a week. And they go to the mechanic, we outsource, as I mentioned, outsource everything, we don't do anything in our place. And then our drivers, which is our luck guys, they end up driving this car, coming from Huntington Beach on Mesa Verde, turning right into the parking lot, going inside, and the only one have access to that. And there's no anymore going back.
Thank you for that. A related question, Mel, for you or for staff. What I was trying to understand is if vehicles were delivered with the semi-truck vehicle carriers and they wanted to park them in the center of Mesa Verde East, would that be for loading or unloading? Would that be allowed?
Not in the street, no.
Okay.
most people, they get, the dealership, they get those big trucks, and they did it a couple of times in the past, and then they got bothered by the police, and they completely stopped because they had 2 cars, and I told them clearly that this is not allowed to be happening in the city of Costa Mesa, and they get tickets, so they cannot do that anymore.
Okay.
And they just bring it straight to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
So my architect was just saying that we're also having a walk-in stairs that we made stairs on the side. So if anybody wants to go down, so there's not going to be like driving around, you just go through the stairway that we already created 2 of them actually.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any more questions of the applicant? If not, I'll open this for public comment. You can have a seat, and then we'll call you back up if.
Absolutely.
And sir, if I could, Mr. Humphrey, I'm sorry, if I could have you come back up real quick. I have to ask him the obligatory question I forgot to ask him. You've read the conditions of approval in the staff report, and you agree with them?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Humphrey, please.
Thank you. Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. I think this is wonderful. We don't get these places where we actually fix a parking deficiency and actually have enough parking to be taking care of the site. My God almighty, this is great. For that matter alone is wonderful. Having said that, of course, you know me, I can't just say one thing. First, I have a question. I don't know, does the expenditure, the refacading and the work done for the parking, does that trigger ADA compliance issues for both properties because of the amount of dollars involved and the value of the property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
We'll have an answer for you for that.
Okay, I just don't know that answer,
Okay.
but that was one answer.
Okay.
All right. And secondarily, at the Merrimack and Harbor is the Cadillac dealership, and they have a condition of use to your question. They have a condition of use that they cannot unload on Merrimack, 4-lane wide road, across the street from a residential because it is now unloaded in a residential area. Agilon is residential, and the people in Agilon have already had a number of issues with traffic and crossing the road and what have you, just for a crosswalk in there. But that kind of process, if they're now being burdened with unloading of vehicles in the center of Mesa Verde, et cetera, but I did not see any condition that requires them to continue to unload across the street where they unload right now anyway. So I don't see a limitation there. And the truth is that the loaders, they drive up the street, the first place they can stop, they stop if they're going to deliver it to, they don't have a very specific guideline. So I would ask that you would make sure that guideline is imposed, that they cannot unload in the middle of Mesa Verde or along a side, since it's right across the street from residential. Other than that, I don't have any problems. I think, like I said, I think it's great that we're getting more parking in an area that isn't terribly parked right now, but at least we don't add to the aggravation, and we certainly fix a deficiency that's already there. Thank you, gentlemen. Ma'am.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Rohrbaugh. I'm a resident of Azalon. I've lived in Azalon for 3.5 years. Auto transport trucks park in that center divider and block the ingress and egress to the B building of Azalon. If you're coming out of Azalon and that truck is in the center divider, you cannot turn left. You have to go right and go all the way around the block. This is a regular occurrence. It's not one time or maybe 2 times. It's a regular occurrence. I don't know whose transport truck that is, but it's there. And it's not only that, it's the beer trucks for 7-Eleven, it's the Frito trucks for 7-Eleven, that liquor store. They park in that center island and block that gate. So, my concern is safety, traffic safety. This is a major construction project. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have heavy equipment being hauled in on transport trucks. You're going to be having dump trucks come to haul dirt out and stage somewhere. You're going to have cement trucks staging and coming in on Mesa Verde or Harbor Boulevard. The traffic right now is manageable. What will it be like during the construction period, and how long will that last? There are 56 units that face Mesa Verde Drive East. All of those residents are between the ages of 55 and 95. Their lives are going to be disrupted by this construction project. I would request the Planning Commission do a safety report regarding traffic at its present condition, traffic during the construction, and traffic after. And because the residents of Azalon walk with their walkers, pushed in their wheelchairs, in their scooters, to those facilities across the street. And a major transport truck or a dump truck or a semi coming down Mesa Verde may not see them. And then what do we have? Please, I request that the Planning Commission defer voting on this application until a traffic safety report is done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Pendarvis, and I also live in Azalon. And I share many of the same concerns that Stephanie does with respect to construction traffic, especially considering it can start early in the morning. It can go 7 days a week. It can run from 7 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. While some of our residents do get up early for go to work or whatever reason, some of them do need to sleep in, and their sleep will be disturbed by some of this noise. But I am a resident of Costa Mesa, and I do like all the businesses here to be successful. And I am glad that Nash Auto is doing well enough that they need to consider expanding their facilities. But in the long term, I do have concerns about traffic problems on Mesa Verde. I also see the car carriers parked in the middle of the street. I know that affects sight lines. I know that it makes it harder to turn in and out of our buildings. And while this gentleman says there's not going to be much traffic around there from his business, what's going to happen there after he's gone and we still have this garage? And the new owner comes in and says, wow, you know, this is really great. And there's an increase in traffic because they need people going in and out all day long. And I think we need to consider not just the short term for this gentleman's business, but also the long term for what comes next. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Ray Fabian, and I'm with the Super 8 Motel next door to Nash. And I only have a few questions because I can't tell from these drawings what the inn that abuts my property is going to look like. It looks like where the storage is and what have you. But it looks like it should be a nice block wall or cement or something. And the times of the construction concerned us also, since we have people staying at our motel. Last June, we had a big issue with people going into his parking lot behind the Chinese place. And then there's just a chain link fence. Well, they busted it all down and came and sat on his property and our property and did all kinds of drugs. I have pictures of them shooting up and stuff. And I went over there several different times and asked they referred me to the owner, and I left my name and number, and he never returned my call. So what concerns me is his lack of concern that if you're homeless and you see, oh, wow, they've gave me a sheltered place to live now. Is there going to be extra security in this covered parking structure? Or is it going to be a magnet for more deviants? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, I'll ask the applicant to come back to the podium if he wishes to offer some closing remarks and if there are any follow-up questions from the commission. Sure. Yes, sir.
In respect to the last question, we're going to have a block wall at the end of the property, which is adjoining the Motel 8. So there is no access anymore from this property into the next property. That fence will be gone, and the block wall will go up. The same existing block wall that exists in there going to go up also to be the same way as before. Right now there is a block wall that is differentiating between the two properties. The same block wall will continue on the level of the Nash Auto. So on the bottom we have a block wall, and on the top we have block wall. So that area will be closed completely. Does it answer you? Are you understandable? I don't know if I make myself clear on that issue.
Okay.
Please.
I'm just make a comment, actually. Thank you. I never met you before, and I'm sorry that I never get the message. I swear to you, I would have called you back. I'm not that kind of a person, so I apologize for that. And she actually has a very major concern, and this is actually one of the things is going to fix. There's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of people to take drugs. We find needles and things like that in the back alley right now. It is a back alley right now. After the project is actually finished, it's our parking underground garage is going to be gated, so there's no access to public to go in and out of that. And it's going to be a lot more light, a lot more cameras, a lot more security than what it is kind of position right now. So the only way that they actually have no access to this area whatsoever, that's what we're going to be doing, except just the people that they park their cars in the common parking area. Construction is construction. It's going to have some interruption, and I apologize. It just things happen. I mean, people need to improve their business and build things, and that's just part of what improvement is. I'll try to make it as minimal, as painless as possible. Time is a factor for me also. It's very concerned for me because it's making a huge interruption for my business while this is happening. So trust me, I'm more for finding the best company that can get this to the shortest time possible. I am definitely studying everything. Everything's going to be studied. Nothing is going to be affected. And they're professional people. They know what they're doing. I think. I'm sorry. So that's I don't know. That's how I see it. So I think it's going to be a better for everything. More parking, more security, less drug people there. I think it's going to be better for everybody. That's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioners, any final questions of the applicant? Commissioner Woods.
I have a quickie. So you mentioned there'd be a gate to the subterranean parking. Would that just be closed, open during normal business hours?
No, it will be completely closed. It will be only access with either going to be a code or a remote.
I think you're talking about the gate in front of the Mesa Verde.
No,
before
she's
going
talking
to
about
parking.
No, I know that within the
parking.
subterranean,
Yes.
you have a gated off area
Yes,
to
it's
keep
going
your.
to be opening and closing according to going in and out. So it's going to be always shut
Inside.
except, yes.
Right, but outside of it, to get down to the subterranean parking, will there be any gate there? And I'm just thinking of, you mentioned there's a homeless issue. I mean, we all know that, right?
Right.
Will you have the ability to close that subterranean parking outside of business? Once it's 9 o'clock at night, everybody goes home. Do you have the ability to close that so that you don't get folks going in there and trying to camp overnight?
Yes, and that's actually, I think, proposed in the plan, right?
It's not proposed, but if that's one of the conditions, we can do that, yes.
Okay.
We're talking about the gate in front.
Yeah,
Facing the
I'm
Mesa
just trying to
Verde,
think
so
of
people cannot
how to
go in
keep
there
folks out. It seemed like it'd be kind of an attractive place to go, in the middle of the night when it's, there's not a lot of people around.
We don't have a problem adding a gate there as an extra security to have this. As it is right now, there's no gate.
Okay.
we could propose something like that. We're not against it. I mean,
Okay,
it's
I was
probably
just-
give more, yeah, we're okay, whatever. But I think with the lights that we're adding, with how we're putting a lot of lights there, and it's going to be very bright, and our guys in and out all day, I think that's going to provide a lot more security. And at nighttime, gate is going to close, then anybody can do anything anywhere, as you know. It's just
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then my other question would be our traffic engineer. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from the residents is that they're not, they don't have any problems with the type of business. It's just all the issues with folks using that center line on Mesa Verde, especially, particularly 7-Eleven and for their deliveries and stuff. Is there anything that the city can do to try to discourage, the use of that lane for loading and offloading of supplies?
Yeah, so one thing that can be done is the police department can be alerted to that and give tickets. And I know that they've given tickets on Harbor Boulevard in the past. And I don't know about Mesa Verde specifically, but the police department can give tickets. And then after a few tickets, the people are unloading, they're pretty hefty fines. And so they don't want to continue to do that.
Just thank you.
So the police department would be the best option for that, because it's not allowed to do that in the center median.
Okay. Okay, so it just calling out the police every time you see it happen and hope that discourages future behavior.
And Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, also if there were specific times of the day that we knew that this was occurring, that would also be helpful with enforcement.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
For your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Zick. And then, you had a question? I'm sorry, sir, can you come back up? So Commissioner Zick, I'm going to ask you to defer for a minute. Commissioner Colbert, I'm sorry.
We're happy to do it.
Go ahead, Commissioner Colbert.
Two questions, sir. First off, about the projected growth of the business, you indicated that you wanted to meet customer demand within the application, and you also spoke about the 25 to 40 cars you sell each month. Is there any projected growth within your business that would create more demand from your business?
It's pretty much just going to, because we're not actually adding, we're just basically, instead of having the place across the street as leased place and putting our cars there, it's going to be here. So it's going to be very stable and very similar to what's happening right now.
All right.
Does that answer? Go ahead.
All right, thank you for that. Is there any indication regarding the construction time period? I know you said you're still researching that, but do you have any indication as to how long that would take?
From 4 to 6 months, that's what we're estimating that it should be taken, from 4 to 6 months. Yeah.
And are you, that's a very aggressive timeline. Would you be open to modifying construction times?
I'm all for it. I am. If there's any way that I can make it less, trust me, I will, because it's also putting a load on how we operate right now. So,
right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is also regarding the construction. And I'm trying to understand some of the logistics that you are anticipating. Staging of vehicles, the operation of your business during the construction, operation of the 1505 Mesa Verde during construction, in particular with the loss of the parking lot in the back. Can you explain a little bit of the logistics of how you expect that to go, or is it just going to be a miserable 6 months for everybody involved?
I have secured off-site parking structural that I will be using. There's a church down the street. They know me. I talked to them, and they have multiple parking levels. And I have a signed agreement from them that we will be moving all our cars. It will be inconvenient because it's a lot longer drive back and forth, but that was the only way that we can make it possible.
Okay, and Mel, I've got a question for you. So you've explained how vehicle parking in the center of Mesa Verde East is not allowed. Are there any provisions that are allowed in terms of temporary use of that? For example, during construction, would there be any temporary permitting that would be, I see a no coming. But that's my question. Are there any temporary accommodations that the city makes for that sort of construction activity?
Members of the Planning Commission, so in order for any activity to occur in the public right-of-way, an encroachment permit would be required. And so that would be, the applicant would need to go to the Engineering Division and Transportation Division, and we would have to review what their proposal is and determine whether it was going to be allowed or not.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, very much. Yes.
I can verify that one, which is most of the activity will be done through the Nash Auto. We're not going to go through the Mesa Drive to do the excavation or do the construction. Since the excavation will be done through the Nash Auto, so the access, all of the trucks, all of the construction vehicles will be through the Harbor Boulevard, through the driveway of the Nash.
Okay, thank you very much. One quick question of staff. I didn't see it in the conditions. Is this a type of project where we might require some kind of construction management plan from the applicant? So we know, okay. That's what I figured so, but
Yes, one of our standard requirements is construction management and construction access plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, sir. Okay, I will close the public hearing and bring the matter up to dais for commissioner comments or a motion. Commissioner Woods.
I'd like to make a motion that we find the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA Guidelines, Section 15303, Class 3 for new construction, and approve the proposed project subject to conditions of approval.
Okay, I will second that. And are there any comments?
I have a quick one. I just wanted to commend you for thinking of creating subterranean parking. Most people scoff at that question. Like, no, we can't do that, it's too expensive, or no, we can't do that because, yeah, whatever. And this was the first thing that you considered. So thank you for that, and thank you for considering the aesthetics of a huge corridor like Harbor Boulevard. And I wish you luck.
Commissioner Zick. Did you have a comment?
I did. Well, I had a question for the maker of the motion, if she would entertain a additional condition of approval that a gate be installed at the entrance to the ramp to the subterranean level, and that be open during business hours and locked after business hours.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Before the second concurs, just to be clear, so you would want it at the end of the slope, furthest away from Mesa Verde East when it enters the garage.
So that's a good question. I would not care if it was at the top of the slope or at the bottom of the slope, just that it would be locking off the underground level in non-business hours.
Okay. And so I'll have to go back, quick question to staff. Has the police department looked at this plan and have they commented?
Yes, it was reviewed by the police department. They didn't have any major comments or concerns.
Okay. If the applicant is not, isn't opposed to that, I will second with that addition. So the second concurs. Okay, any other comments? Just real quick, I understand concerns about construction, but if we stopped or were worried about all construction because of noise or inconvenience to people that are already here, we'd probably be still driving on dirt roads. And also, Azalon was a huge construction project, and the people in Mesa Verde kind of dealt with it, and we all did. So I think this won't be as disruptive as some people think. So I will call for the question.
That motion carried 5-0.
Okay, and that decision is final within 7 days unless appealed to the City Council. Thank you very much. Good luck. Okay, and that brings us to departmental reports, public services. Any reports tonight?
No reports.
Okay, developmental services.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick one. Last Friday, the city's temporary bridge structure opened down the street at Lighthouse Church. I just want to let the commission know that occurred. The temporary structure at that site will be there for approximately 12 months and will sleep up to 50 individuals, and we're excited to have it open. As of last Friday, I didn't check today, but as of last Friday, we had already checked in over 20 individuals into the temporary shelter.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis, and I, again, hats off to the city council and everyone on staff who worked both to find the temporary shelter and the permanent one that will be coming, presumably. City Attorney, any report?
No report.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners, for all your work, and we will stand adjourned until the regularly scheduled meeting of April 22nd. Good night.